Chapter 1187. The Imperial Guard who had shot the arrow did not even have time to fight back before he was captured by the surrounding Imperial Guards. Without a doubt, he was also a pawn, a spy that the Mountain Sea Guards had planted in the great Han Dynasty's palace. Looking inside the palace, in the blink of an eye, Sword Chi Thunder had reached the two eunuchs. The Chungying sword in his hand flashed in the air. Before the two eunuchs could react, their throats were slit by the invisible sword, and they died on the spot. As a top-notch swordsman, Sword Chi Thunder was known for his speed. Coupled with a divine weapon like the Chungying sword, he could kill without leaving a trace. Blood splattered in the air. Emperor Wu of Han, who had been sitting calmly on the throne, was shocked and shouted, "Protect the Emperor! Protect the Emperor!" The Imperial Guards heard him and immediately turned around. They saw the two eunuchs lying on the ground, bleeding profusely. They were dead. The mutant who was protecting the Emperor held a sword in his right hand and attacked the Emperor without a sword. "Damn it, we've been tricked." The Imperial Guard was not a fool. He immediately understood that this was a meticulously planned assassination. Without a second thought, he turned around and charged toward the Sword Chi Thunderclap. Unfortunately, it was too late. Sword Chi Thunder knew that the opportunity was gone. After killing the two eunuchs, he did not stop. He took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Emperor Wu of Han. The Chungying sword pierced out like lightning. With just one strike, he accurately pierced Emperor Wu's heart. Emperor Wu of Han wanted to dodge, but everything happened too fast, and the Chungying sword could not be seen. There was no way to dodge or retreat. The only thing that awaited him was death. Sword Chi Thunder used his true yuan, and the Chungying sword shook, shattering Emperor Wu's heart. A genius had fallen just like that. In just a short while, 5 Imperial Guards had already arrived, blocking all of Sword Chi Thunder's escape routes. At the entrance of the palace, hundreds of Imperial Guards rushed in like a tide, determined to capture the assassin. Sword Chi Lei Eend did not panic in the slightest. He did not even turn his head. The Chungying sword turned around and blocked all the incoming attacks. Then, he lowered his body and turned around. The Chungying sword once again flashed with a cold light. Clang! Clang! The weapons of the Inner Forbidden Guards were naturally of the highest quality. However, in front of a divine weapon that had the support of inner force, they were like bamboo poles that were sliced apart by the shadow-bearing sword. Seeing this, even someone as calm as the Imperial Guard could not help but be stunned. Furthermore, when the Sword Chi Thunderclap turned around, it revealed that Emperor Wu of Han, who was sitting on the throne, had already collapsed to the ground. His chest was covered in blood, and he was not even able to make a sound. When the Imperial Guard saw this, they couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts. Some of their faces had already turned deathly pale. If His Majesty were to die, they didn't need to think to know what would happen to them. Seeing this, an Imperial Guard stepped forward to check on the Emperor's injuries. The rest of the Imperial Guards chased after the thunderous Sword Chi with all their might. The only way to atone for their crimes was to capture the assassin. Otherwise, as an Imperial Guard, even dying 100 times wouldn't be enough. Thunder Sword Chi swept his gaze across the hall, only to see that it was filled with Imperial Guards. It was impossible for him to charge out of the hall. Furthermore, if he were to fall into a chaotic battle, he would only attract more and more Imperial Guards. After repelling the Imperial Guards, Thunder Sword Chi Thunderclap turned around and walked towards the left side of the throne. That was where Emperor Wu of Han used to go to the royal court, and it could also lead him out of the hall. Right at this moment, the Imperial Guard who was checking on Emperor Wu's injuries cried out in grief. "His Majesty has passed away. Quick, capture the assassin." When these words were spoken, the entire hall fell silent for a second. Every single Imperial Guard felt their hearts stop beating, and some even felt their legs go weak. Capture the assassin. Don't let her escape. In the end, it was the Imperial Guard who reacted and took the lead to chase after Thunder Sword Chi Thunderclap. The entire hall was already in chaos. Thunder Sword Chi Thunderclap barged into the left corridor, and she had no intention of leaving the hall. For a building like the royal palace, the space between each hall was empty, and if she were to leave, she would only become a target. Turning around, she entered a side room on the right side of the corridor and hid there. As long as she could survive the initial pursuit, when the news of Emperor Wu's death spread, Luoyang City would be in chaos. That would be the best time for Thundersword Chi Thunderclap to escape. Soon, the news of Emperor Wu's death swept through the entire Luoyang City like a hurricane, causing the already unstable royal city to become even more unstable. Normally, when the emperor passed away, the crown prince would naturally take over the throne. If things went well, there wouldn't be any major trouble. But what time was it now? The Great Xia army had been besieging Luoyang for half a month, and the city could be breached at any time. At this critical juncture, Emperor Wu, who was the backbone of the Han dynasty, was suddenly assassinated. It was simply devastating. A group of experienced civil and military officials were all stunned on the spot, and some of them already had other ideas. Inevitably, the Han army was in an uproar. At this moment, the secret agents of the mountain and sea guards became active again. They visited the civil and military officials one by one, conveying the goodwill of Great Xia, and promised that as long as they were willing to surrender, Great Xia would put them in important positions. What was more frightening was that, taking advantage of the chaos in the city, the Tingyu Tower, in the name of assisting the Han army in defending the city, quietly approached the granary in the west of the city, and then set it on fire. Billowing smoke shrouded the sky above the city. The successive blows made it hard for people to breathe. At this moment, Han Xin commanded the Great Xia army to launch the strongest wave of attacks against the Han army while the enemy's morale was low. Under the strong attack, the Han army was gradually defeated. In particular, during the battle on the northwest street, 10,000 combat players from the Tingyu Tower suddenly attacked from the rear, catching the Han army unprepared. The Great Xia army seized the opportunity and captured the enemy's fortress in one fell swoop. As a result, the Great Xia army successfully opened up the passage to the inner city. This time, the imperial court of the Han dynasty was in a complete panic. The voices of surrender gradually converged and blended into a strong sound that reverberated in the sky above Luoyang. Even the crown prince, Lu Fuling, who was pushed to the forefront, was unable to control the overall situation. At this moment, only General Wei Qing could control the situation. As long as the Han army didn't collapse, there was still hope for the Han dynasty. The civil and military officials wouldn't dare to act rashly before the situation was clear. The problem was, could the Han army still hold on under the fierce attack of the Great Xia army? In a certain street fortress in the west of Luoyang, when the news of the emperor's death came, even the strong Wei Qing couldn't help but tremble. To Wei Qing, Emperor Wu of Han was like a huge mountain. Once the mountain collapsed, it would naturally cause the world to collapse. The next few pieces of bad news couldn't move Wei Qing anymore. Wei Qing only cared about one question. How did His Majesty die? Who is the assassin? Has he been executed? It was the head of the Tingyu Tower. His sword energy was thunderous. The Imperial Guards are still searching and haven't found the whereabouts of the assassin, a guard reported. Wei Qing's eyes flickered coldly. The traitor of the Tingyu Tower. Guards, here. Bring a team of men and immediately seal off the headquarters of the Tingyu Tower. Leave no one alive. Yes, sir. Wei Qing rarely dealt such a fatal blow, but this time he was really angry. Regardless of whether Luoyang could be defended or not, he had to make the Tingyu Tower pay the price in blood. Unfortunately, Wei Qing was still one step too late. When they decided to assassinate Emperor Wu of Han, the Tingyu Tower had expected such a day to come. Apart from the 10,000 combat players, the rest of the guild members had already quietly hidden. The vast Luoyang was currently in a state of chaos. As the local tyrant of Luoyang, it would be extremely difficult for the Han army to find the members of the Tingyu Tower if they wanted to hide. As for the headquarters of the Tingyu Tower, it had long been empty. After the 10,000 combat players cooperated with the Great Xia army to take down the fortress, they naturally joined the Great Xia army and were safe. Speaking of which, the Tingyu Tower had put in a lot of effort to cooperate with the Great Xia army. This was not only the will of the Tingyu Tower, but also the will of the entire guild. They realized that this was the last chance of the Tingyu Tower. If they missed this opportunity, the Tingyu Tower would probably become a second-rate or even a third-rate guild in the future. The key was time. At present, the Great Han Empire was suffering from internal and external aggression, and the Han army had no time to conduct a full search. That would only aggravate the turmoil in Luoyang and be of no help. After knowing such an outcome, Wei Qing was so angry that he wanted to kill someone. Needless to say, all of this was definitely a trick of Great Xia, and their goal was to quickly take down Luoyang. Wei Qing looked around at the Han soldiers who were still fighting. They all had worried expressions on their faces. Some were worried about the future of the Great Han Empire, while others were worried about their own futures. The only thing they didn't have was an unyielding fighting spirit. This was because the existence that they were fighting for was no longer in this world. The granary had been burned, and their retreat route had been cut off. The Han soldiers had to think for themselves and their families. If they stubbornly resisted and angered Great Xia, everything would be over if they massacred the entire city. Seeing this, Wei Qing only felt sorrow, a heavy sorrow. Not long ago, when did the all-powerful cavalry of the Great Han Empire fall to such a state? Was this wilderness a new battlefield or a graveyard for the Han army? Chapter 1188. Wei Qing was unwilling to be captured, but it was all in vain. Over the next 3 days, the Great Xia army attacked fiercely using the broken fortress as a breakthrough point. Soon, they would reach the foot of the imperial city. Over the next 2 days, the Han army was obviously unwilling to put up too much resistance. They would often raise their hands and surrender halfway through the battle. This was beyond Wei Qing's control. At this stage, no one could change the fate of the Great Han army. At this moment, the Grand Council of Great Xia and the Commander-in-Chief of the Southeast War Zone, Han Exen, represented the Great Xia Imperial Court and issued a final announcement to the Great Han to surrender. Great Han has 2 days to surrender to Great Xia. Emperor Xia is benevolent and promises to protect the royal family. Otherwise, if they continue to resist stubbornly, the Liu family will be completely wiped out. Once the announcement was made, not only was the imperial court shaken, but even Crown Prince Liu Fuling could not sit still. If he could not protect the Liu family, he would be a sinner of the Great Han. He had no choice but to face his ancestors without any hesitation. The next day, Liu Fuling expressed his willingness to surrender. Wei Qing saw this and was powerless to stop it. On the 28th of the 7th month, the Han army completely surrendered. Han Xian led the Great Xia army and quickly took over Luoyang, guarding the important passes and the remaining granaries. The Battle of Luoyang came to an end. Just as the Great Xia army was busy taking over Luoyang, there was a shocking piece of news. After General Wei Qing returned to his residence, he committed suicide in the secret chamber. Apart from Wei Qing, Zhang Qian and Sima Qian also committed suicide in their own residences, vowing not to surrender. They were buried together with Emperor Wu of Han, and also together with the Han dynasty. It was truly a pity. The most outstanding talents always withered in their best years. After learning of Wei Qing's suicide, Ouyang Shuo, who was overseeing Shanghai City, was speechless for a long time. This was his most valued general, but he chose such a method to defend the last glory of the Han army. After a long time, Ouyang Shuo ordered, "Bury Wei Qing." Wei Qing's suicide caused a huge uproar in the Han army. Upon receiving the news, more than 100 soldiers committed suicide in the barracks on the same day to follow Wei Qing. The Han family's spirit had never withered. Gaye Year 6, 1st of August, Luoyang. Since early in the morning, the Great Xia army had imposed martial law on the public square where the transmission array was located. The entire capital was sealed off, and unauthorized people were not allowed to enter. On the square, Han Xian led a group of generals and stood on the left, while the Great Han Dynasty's crown prince, Liu Fuling, led a group of civil and military officials and stood on the right, waiting for Ouyang Shuo's arrival. In the crowd, There was also the thunderous sword chi of the head of the rain-savoring tower. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Ouyang Shua brought the cabinet chief Jiang Shang, the chamberlain of Chamberlain Zhang Yi, and other ministers under the protection of the divine martial guards to Luoyang City to formally accept the Great Han Dynasty surrender. "Welcome, Your Majesty." As soon as Ouyang Shua appeared, the people on both sides simultaneously saluted him. Under Zhang Yi's lead, the former crown prince of the Great Han, Lu Fuling, dressed in plain clothes, presented the Great Han imperial seal and the letter of credence. Ouyang Shua accepted it and gestured for Jiang Shang to announce the decree. Jiang Shang understood and took out the edict he had prepared earlier. Lu Fuling received the edict. Lu Fuling bowed once more when he saw this. "This sinner, Lu Fuling, receives the decree." When he said this, a trace of humiliation flashed in Lu Fuling's eyes. In the blink of an eye, he changed from a crown prince to a prisoner. Nothing could be more changeable than this. By the decree of Emperor Xia, the former crown prince of the Great Han Dynasty, Lu Fuling is the king of Han, and the former crown prince's wife, Shangguan, is the princess of Han. The crown prince's mansion will be changed to the king of Han's mansion. You are not allowed to leave Luoyang City without the order. You're not allowed to make friends with the court officials, and you're not allowed to raise soldiers. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Respectfully receiving the imperial edict, Lu Fuling could not hide the shock in his eyes. Although the conferred king of Han had neither fief nor real power, and was just an idle king, no matter what, this was the first conferred king of a different surname in the Great Xia dynasty, which was already a very great honor. Before, Lu Fuling just wanted to preserve the Lu bloodline, but he did not expect that there would be such a conferment. Not only Lu Fuling, but even the group of former Great Han Dynasty's civil and military officials behind him also showed a commotion. Obviously, they were surprised by the Great Xia Dynasty's kindness. Ouyang Shua did this to appease the Han Dynasty's old officials. The old officials that he was referring to were not only Lu Fuling's father, Sima Xiangru, and Dong Zhongshu, but also Xiao He, Hui Tsubing, and other former subordinates of the Great Han Dynasty. Treating the descendants of Liu Bang well would obviously win the hearts of the people, and it would also show Ouyang Shua's imperial magnanimity. Moreover, with the Han royal family's example, if the other dynasties surrendered to the Great Xia dynasty, they would also do the same. This was very beneficial to the Great Xia dynasty's future strategy. After a simple ceremony, Ouyang Shua was welcomed to a mansion in the city. He did not live in the Great Han Palace. In fact, the Great Han Palace was about to be demolished, and the governor's office would be built on its original site. It was necessary to erase the traces of the Great Han Dynasty in Luoyang. After settling down, Jiang Shang represented Ouyang Shua to appease the group of civil and military officials. Ouyang Shua only saw two people. One was Han Xian, and the other was Sword Chi Layin. When he saw Han Xian, he naturally wanted to understand the frontline reports. Aside from taking over Luoyang, Han Xian also did two things. The first was to imprison over 100,000 Han prisoners of war and wait for the Privy Council to reorganize them. The second was to send troops to take over other cities. In the next few days, the cabinet would arrange for officials to rush to the Central Plains province. How long can the army's provisions last? Ouyang Shua asked. Han Xian knew that this was the main point of the king's question, so he did not dare to hide it. Although we've taken over Luoyang and saved more than half of the food from the burned granaries, it can only last for 20 days at most. Ouyang Shua fell silent. He pondered for a moment and said, "What if we forcibly levy grain in the counties?" According to the system, the Central Plains province was already under the rule of the Great Xia dynasty. Apart from paying agricultural taxes, the people did not have to hand over any additional provisions. Forcibly levying grain was only suitable during times of war, and it was easy to lose the hearts of the people, especially if they forcibly levied grain right after taking over the Central Plains province. It would put the governor's office in a difficult position in the future. Ouyang Shua did not want to do that, but the Central Plains was currently in flames. After taking over the Great Han Dynasty, The Great Xia could not stay where it was and had to attack again. Extraordinary times called for extraordinary measures. Han Xian did not hesitate when he heard this and replied, "If we really disregard the cost of levying grain, then with the wealth of the Central Plains province, its potential is extremely huge. It won't be a problem for it to last for 2 to 3 months. Then let's levy it." Ouyang Shua decided. Yes. Han Xian's eyes lit up as he vaguely saw through the king's intentions. Logically speaking, after taking down the Dark Han dynasty, the Leopard army would switch from offense to defense according to the imperial court's established strategy and help the imperial court defend the Central Plains province. But now, the king was in a hurry to levy grain. Obviously, he had other ideas. Han Xian was unwilling to continue investigating this matter and only accepted the order. What he had to do was to take down the entire Central Plains province as soon as possible and allow the Leopard army to recover its peak strength. He had a premonition that the war in the Central Plains had just begun. Chapter 1189. After sending away Han Xian, Ouyang Shua met Thunder of Sword Energy alone. To be honest, Ouyang Shua didn't expect that Tingyu Tower would fight so hard. Not to mention the assassination in the palace. Just the attack of 10,000 adventurer players made a great contribution on the battlefield. For this, Tingyu Tower also paid a heavy price. Not to mention the headquarters was burned to the ground. The industries in Luoyang were also destroyed by Wei Qing's order, and more than 1,000 players died. Thunder of Sword Energy's decisiveness made Ouyang Shua look at it in a new light. With the capture of Luoyang, the harvest of the rain-listening building was absolutely worth it. Ouyang Shua gave Thunder Sword Energy 2 choices: stay in Luoyang or move to Shanghai City. Both are acceptable. If it stayed in Luoyang, Tingyu Tower's destroyed industries would be rebuilt by the governor's office of the Central Plains province, and there would even be relevant compensation. They would never let Tingyu Tower suffer losses. Ouyang Shua had decided to appoint his father Yin as the first governor of the Central Plains province and try to use the Han dynasty's old officials as much as possible. Speaking of his father Yin, he was also a famous minister of the Western Han dynasty. He was born a poor family and learned the art of crossing and crossing in his early years. Later, he learned the Book of Changes, the Spring and Autumn Annals, and the 100 Schools of Thought. In Qi, he was excluded by the Confucian scholars, so he traveled north to Yin, Zhao, Zhongshan, and other vassal kingdoms, but he was not treated politely. In the first year of Yuan Guang, his father Yin arrived in Chong, and indirectly wrote a letter to Emperor Liu Che. He was summoned on the same day and became a doctor together with Su Lu and Yin. Not long after, he was promoted 4 times in a year and was appointed by Emperor Wu as an exception. He also proposed to Emperor Wu the political idea of great unification. In addition to his father Yin, another famous minister of the Han dynasty, Dong Zhongshu, was arranged by Ouyang Shua to enter the hall of Southwest University China and became Confucius's Confucian Classics assistant. Dong Zhongshu was a doctor in Emperor Jing of Han and taught the Spring and Autumn Annals. In the first year of Emperor Yuan Guang of Han dynasty, Emperor Wu issued an edict asking for a strategy to govern the country. Dong Zhongshu, in his famous strategies to promote the virtuous and virtuous, systematically proposed the theory of interaction between heaven and man, the theory of great unification. Everything that is not in the field of the 6 arts and the art of Confucius should be eliminated, and discard the 100 schools of thought and respect Confucianism alone, which was adopted by Emperor Wu. Confucianism became the orthodox ideology of Chinese society, and its influence lasted for more than 2,000 years. His studies were centered on the Confucian patriarchal ideology, mixed with the theory of yin and yang and the 5 elements, linking divine power, monarchical power, paternal power, and marital power together, forming the theocratic system of theology. Some even jokingly said that Dong Zhongshu was the chief architect of the 2,000 years of feudal rule. The theory proposed by Dong Zhongshu catered to the needs of governance at that time, strengthening the centralization of power and safeguarding the legitimacy of the emperor. At that time, there was no right or wrong. However, when it came to Great Xia, Dong Zhongshu's theory was not in line with Ouyang Shua's political vision. Naturally, he had no choice but to abandon it. Arranging for him to be a disciple of Confucius was also out of consideration for his talent. Sending Dong Zhongshu away was also conducive to breaking the overly rich Confucian atmosphere in the Central Plains province. Ouyang Shua did not forget that when Emperor Wu of Han took over Luoyang, he abandoned the 100 schools of thought and only respected Confucianism, which was incompatible with the 100 schools of thought in Great Xia. This time, Ouyang Shua broke the convention and appointed a large number of old officials of the Great Han Dynasty. Firstly, under the management of the Great Han Dynasty, the Central Plains province's political situation was stable. The sea was clear and the rivers were peaceful. The county magistrates were mainly Han officials, so there was no problem of them being unqualified. Secondly, it was to stabilize the people's hearts and not to cause turmoil. The war in the Central Plains had just begun. What Ouyang Shua needed was a stable Central Plains province. Therefore, it was not appropriate to cause turmoil at this time and replace the officials wantonly, which would cause panic among the people. Moreover, the army also needed the cooperation of these local officials when collecting food. If he really wanted to sort out the Central Plains officialdom, he could wait until the year-end assessment. According to the assessment results of the Administrative Bureau of Personnel, then he could make adjustments. Presumably, by that time, everything would have been settled. If the Tingyu Tower chose to move to Shanghai City, the treatment would naturally be the same as the baleful blood mercenary group and other super guilds. Based on the loss of Luoyang, there would also be additional compensation. Hearing that she could stay in Luoyang, Thunderous Sword was a little tempted. After all, Luoyang was the headquarters of the Tingyu Tower. It had been operating for several years and was deeply rooted here. Moreover, there were no other competitors. It was very easy to achieve a monopoly. Thinking of this, the temptation was too great. Fortunately, Thunderous Sword was not a short-sighted person. She immediately realized that in the situation where all the guilds that settled in Great Xia set their headquarters in Shanghai City, the Tingyu Tower would definitely be an exception if it stayed in Luoyang. Since it was an exception, it would naturally not be accepted by this circle. More importantly, Thunderous Sword had already found out that in Shanghai City, the reorganization of Great Xia's guilds had already entered the fast lane. The two were speeding up the integration, and a large number of adventure players were recruited to serve in the army. A new guild survival model was taking shape, and Thunderous Sword did not want to fall behind. "I choose Shanghai City," Sword Chi Lei Yin answered with decisiveness. "Smart." Ouyang Shua smiled and took the initiative to extend his hand. "Then, let's have a pleasant cooperation. Thunderous Sword also smiled brightly. The Tingyu Tower was finally going to be revitalized. For the next few days, Ouyang Shua stayed in Luoyang. He attended the funerals of Emperor Wu of Han, Wei Qing, and the others, received the old ministers of the Han Dynasty, received the representatives of the guilds and chambers of commerce stationed in Luoyang, and appeared to appease the people. Things happened one after another, and it was difficult for him to rest. When he searched the treasury of the Great Han Dynasty, he also found 2 teleportation talismans. Ouyang Shua used one of them in Hawaii County and officially opened the teleportation formation there so that it would not be isolated overseas. The remaining teleportation talisman was temporarily kept. During this period, under the personal leadership of Jiang Shang, the framework of the Central Plains Province Governor's Office had been set up and would soon be put into operation to help the imperial court stabilize the situation in the Central Plains. Under the Leopard troops' full-speed sweep, the entire Central Plains province had been conquered. In the process, the Leopard troop was still making use of the time to gather provisions and prepare for the next battle. Ouyang Shua admired Han Xian's fighting spirit very much. What made Ouyang Shua even more gratified was that in August, the heavy rain that lasted for more than half a month finally stopped. The long-awaited sunlight shone on the earth again, and people everywhere went out in unison to try their best to harvest as much food as possible that was about to rot in the fields. This was also beneficial for the war in the Central Plains. In another 2 days, when the situation in Luoyang had stabilized, Ouyang Shua prepared to go to fallen Phoenix City and cheer for the Great Jin dynasty as an ally. At present, the war between the Great Zhou and the Great Jin had entered a critical period. Under the relentless pursuit of the Great Zhou, the Great Jin was beaten back step by step. Just yesterday, the vanguard of the Great Zhou Imperial Army had already appeared on the outskirts of fallen Phoenix City, which meant that the war would soon change from an all-out confrontation to the most difficult and tragic siege battle. Once fallen Phoenix City was lost, the Great Jin would be destroyed. As a staunch ally of the Great Jin dynasty and the leader of the Mountain and Sea Alliance, the Great Xia dynasty did not directly assist the Great Jin during this period, and even asked the Great Jin to provide provisions for the leopard troop. This inevitably caused the Great Jin dynasty to suspect that they had been abandoned by the Great Xia dynasty. One could imagine the pressure that Feng Qiuhuang was facing. Under such circumstances, if Ouyang Shua appeared in fallen Phoenix City, the situation would immediately be different. August 2nd, night, Luoyang City. Early the next morning, Ouyang Shua would set off for fallen Phoenix City. Using this last bit of time, Ouyang Shua was prepared to fight through the night and finish the task at hand as quickly as possible. In his room, Ouyang Shua was reading the reports from the front lines. In the northwest, the two warlords of the steppe had already begun their battle. In order to capture the western Turkic Khaganate, Genghis Khan had not only personally set out, but had also sent out almost all his great generals, mobilizing an army of more than 700,000 cavalry. The western Turkic Khaganate was not to be outdone and had sent out all its forces to meet the enemy. Because this was a battle between cavalry, the war was certain to not last for too long. The War Observation Staff of the Grand Council estimated that it would take at most a month for the true ruler of the steppe to be decided. In the north, the Great Xia's war against the Qing was also on the right track. The 11 field armies of the Great Xia had all taken their positions, and large amounts of provisions were being transported by sea to the northern frontier province. In the meantime, the Great Zhou had even attempted to use its fleet to attack the Great Xia supply ships, but with the escort of the Cliff Mountain Fleet and the Coastal Fleet, the Great Zhou's schemes were doomed to fail. Only after losing 10-some warships did the Great Zhou stop its schemes. Of the 500,000 Qing soldiers, 200,000 were stationed on the borders of the Great Xia, and 300,000 were stationed in the capital. They intended to coordinate with the Great Xia and fight a protracted war. But Li Jing did not fall for it. Under Li Jing's orders, the commander of the Soaring Eagle Army, Li Mu, personally led 3 corps of the Soaring Eagle Army to the southwest of the capital and set up camp between the two Qing armies. The remaining 8 corps concentrated their firepower, preparing to copy Han Xian's strategy and besiege the capital. If the 200,000 Qing soldiers attempted to reinforce the capital, they would be ambushed and intercepted by the Soaring Eagle Army. If they did not come to reinforce the capital, the fall of the capital would only be a matter of time. This made the Qing army feel extremely uncomfortable. Emperor Kangxi had no time for regret, nor did he have the energy to reprimand Oh Boy for coming up with this strategy. He could only hope that the Great Zhou could quickly destroy the Great Jin and relieve the Great Qing of its encirclement. The feeling of placing the fate of a country in the hands of another was naturally very unpleasant. But Kangxi had no other choice. Ouyang Shua put down the battle report and sighed. Because of the existence of the Great Xia, the 9 lords of the Huaxia region were destined to be unable to be as all-powerful as they were in his previous life. Just as Ouyang Shua was about to rest, there was a sudden hurried knock on the door. Chapter 1190. It was August 2nd, 4 p.m. in the afternoon. Luofeng City, Palace. In the quiet imperial study, Great Jin's queen, Feng Qiuhuang, was reading through memorials. The front line was in a tight spot, and Feng Qiuhuang wasn't familiar with military affairs. All she could do was sit in the capital, stabilize the people, and ensure the logistics of the army. She could only rely on the 2 generals, Guizi and Meng Tian. Guizi was currently leading the Blazing Flame Army to defend against the Great Zhou Army, while Meng Tian was leading the Imperial Guards to guard the capital, the last line of defense for the Great Jin Dynasty. As the front line was in a tight spot, the rations were frequently harassed by the Great Zhou Army. Guizi was leading the Blazing Flame Army to retreat towards the capital, preparing to join up with the Imperial Guards to defend the city. Emperor Kangxi was looking forward to the Great Zhou Army destroying the Great Jin Dynasty, while Feng Xiuhuang was looking forward to the Great Xia destroying the Great Qing Dynasty. Although the two of them weren't related, they could sympathize with each other. This was the wilderness. Only the strong could control their fate, while the weak could only submit to fate. Although Feng Xiuhuang had always been unwilling to admit that she was a weakling in the wilderness, without the direct reinforcement from Great Xia, the Great Jin Empire was forced to retreat step by step without any means to retaliate. This made Feng Xiuhuang realize that the Great Jin Empire wasn't considered an expert in this wilderness arena where heroes fought for supremacy. A huge wave could destroy the Great Jin Dynasty. This further strengthened Feng Xiuhuang's determination. If the Great Jin Dynasty could survive this calamity, Feng Xiuhuang was prepared to submit to Great Xia and learn from Bai Hua and the rest. There was no room for her to dance alone in the wilderness. Seeing that Great Xia had revealed its ambition to unify China, Ouyang Shuo was willing to save Great Jin once, but he couldn't send reinforcements every time without asking for anything in return. Even if Ouyang Shuo was willing, the civil and military officials of Great Xia wouldn't be willing. Submitting to Great Xia was the best choice. Thinking of this, a trace of melancholy flashed between Feng Xiuhuang's brows. The day before yesterday, when Feng Xiuhuang expressed his intention to submit to the Xia kingdom for the first time in a clan meeting, he was met with a wave of opposition. Why? Feng Xiuhuang was puzzled. From Feng Xiuhuang's point of view, she would suffer the greatest loss if she submitted to Great Xia. However, the Feng family would be able to put down their pressure and enjoy a comfortable life. So they should be more than happy. Take Bai Hua as an example. Back then, Bai Hua led Lingxi City to submit to Great Xia. In a short span of 2 years, he rose to the illustrious position of Southern Borders Protector General. His power and status were comparable to the current Feng Xiuhuang. The White Birch family also benefited, becoming a prominent family in the Huaxiao region. It wasn't that Feng Xiuhuang was arrogant, but with her abilities and the wealth of the Great Jin Dynasty, her future achievements wouldn't be any weaker than Bai Hua's after she submitted to Great Xia. For the Feng family, there were many advantages and no disadvantages. Facing Feng Xiuhuang's questioning, the Feng family's members stuttered and couldn't come up with a reason. See, after the establishment of the Great Jin Dynasty, the Feng family became a royal family in one fell swoop. This was something that the ancestors of the Feng family had never done. It was really the most glorious period of the Feng family. Dynasty, clan, Feng, dynasty, Xia Jin Dynasty, and said Dynasty clan, Jin Feng, and Jin Feng, said Xia will Xia Ming Jin, Xia, Feng Yang clan. Feng Xiuhuang immediately understood and was disappointed. In the eyes of the Feng clan, they treated Xia Ming Jin as a free bodyguard and enjoyed the protection of Xia Ming Jin. From their point of view, even if Xia Ming Jin unified China, there would be a place for Jin Jin. In fact, they were eager for Xia Ming to be unified so that they could rest easy. The human heart is indeed the most unfathomable. Feng Xiuhuang was disappointed and said, "Regardless of whether you agree or not, I will choose to submit," ending the clan meeting. Feng Xiuhuang, who left in a hurry, did not notice the strange look in the eyes of the elders. "Sister, have some tea and rest." The one who spoke was Qing Wan, a scholar from the Secret Literature Pavilion. As she spoke, she handed her a cup of tea. In the first year of Gaia, Feng Xiuhuang, with the support of Ouyang Shuo, successfully broke away from the clan and became an independent lord. At that time, Feng Xiuhuang had 4 good friends who were also her helpers. They were Qing Wan, Zhu Ke, Black Swan, and Shui Yan. Only Qing Yuan stayed and accompanied Feng Xiuhuang until now. Qing Yuan's loyalty was rewarded handsomely. After the establishment of the Great Jin dynasty, Feng Xiuhuang used Xia Ming's model to perfect the system of the imperial court. Qing Yuan was immediately appointed as the Palm Seal Scholar of the Secret Literature Pavilion. She was Feng Xiuhuang's most trusted official. Feng Xiuhuang did not mind and drank the tea. Who would have thought that the tea would be poisoned? After drinking the tea, Feng Xiuhuang couldn't speak or move. He collapsed on the chair and became a vegetable. An empress was betrayed by the person she trusted the most. Perhaps this was not considered a betrayal, because from the beginning, Qing Yuan was a chess piece that Di Chun had planted beside Feng Xiuhuang. She did not leave in the first year of Gaia, because she wanted to hide deeper. Only now was she activated by Di Chun. The culprit, Qing Yuan, did not look happy at all. Looking at Feng Xiuhuang, who had collapsed on the chair, Qing Yuan's face was covered in tears. Humans were not plants. How could they be emotionless? After spending 5 to 6 years together, the two of them were not sisters, but they were closer than sisters. If it was possible, Qing Yuan would rather not be activated for the rest of her life. But fate was cruel, so cruel that it made people helpless. Not everyone could control their own fate. Qing Yuan was such a pitiful person who was teased by fate. In reality, Di Chun had done Qing Yuan a favor. He even held Qing Yuan's weakness. He could consign her and her family to eternal damnation. Qing Yuan had no choice but to carry out Di Chun's request. Qing Yuan knelt in front of Feng Xiuhuang and cried, "Sister, I know you can hear me. I have let you down. This crime is committed by me and cannot be forgiven. I can only atone for it with my death." As she spoke, Qing Yuan bit the poison in her mouth and committed suicide. Then, she turned into light and left. Looking at the white light in front of her, a teardrop fell from the corner of Feng Xiuhuang's eyes. Qing Yuan left. After reincarnating, she disappeared from Luo Feng's city and this game world. She did not see her again until the end of the game. This day was called the Qing Yuan Tribulation. Soon, the abnormality of the Imperial study was discovered by the guards outside. Imperial Guard Commander Ran Min received the report and dealt with it calmly. He ordered the palace maids to send the Empress to her bedroom and ordered the Imperial physician to detoxify her. At the same time, he informed the ministers and members of the royal family to enter the palace to discuss how to deal with the situation. The front line was in an intense battle. If the news of the Empress being poisoned were spread, who knew what kind of uproar it would cause? Ran Min was very responsible. He quietly sealed the palace, trying to make it look loose on the outside but tight on the inside. Bedroom, outer hall. Great Jin's Prime Minister Meng, Yi, and the 3 core members of the Feng family gathered together to discuss how to deal with the aftermath. Unlike Great Xia, which had a large number of civil officials, Great Jin had limited civil officials. Feng Xiuhuang referred to Great Xia's model and made some adjustments to the structure of the dynasty. The biggest change was not to set up a cabinet, but a prime minister. As the only civil official in Great Jin, Meng Yi was naturally the best candidate for prime minister. Other than that, the Feng family also held positions in Great Jin's imperial court. They were a force to be reckoned with. Feng Xiuhuang, who was born in an aristocratic family, was subconsciously used to ruling the country. The atmosphere in the outer hall was a little gloomy. Just now, Great Jin's 3 best imperial physicians had examined the Empress one by one, but none of them had a clue. They said that the poison was strange, but it had a special characteristic, which was that it could be cured without being attacked. As long as she recuperated for a week, the poison would be cured. But what time was it now? The enemy was about to arrive. If the Empress did not wake up for a week, it would be strange if nothing happened. Perhaps before the Empress woke up, Great Jin would already be gone. Therefore, they had to think of another way. Actually, it was not difficult to cure the poison. As long as they gave Feng Xiuhuang a substitute doll and killed Feng Xiuhuang, the poison would be cured after she reincarnated. The problem was that killing Feng Xiuhuang was equivalent to regicide. Other than the members of the royal family, no one else would dare to do it. That was the strange part. The people of the Feng family would rather wait than take this risk. Feng Qiuhuang's brother, Great Jin's first-rank marquis, Feng Tianlai, said, "Death is a taboo, not to mention the death of the empress. In my opinion, we should wait for a week. As for the matters of the imperial court, the empress is not around, but the royal family is. We can handle it on her behalf. Could it be that the imperial court will not function if the empress is not around for a week?" Faced with such a question, what else could Meng Yi say? Although he instinctively felt that there was something fishy about this was an internal matter of the royal family. It was not something that a foreign official like him could interfere with. Just like that, the matter was decided without any reason. Later that day, the imperial court announced that the empress was ill and needed to recuperate. For the time being, the first-rank marquis and the empress brother, Feng Tianlai, would be the regent to handle all government affairs. The first thing Feng Tianlai did after becoming the regent was to close the teleportation array in Luofeng City. The secret agents of the Mountain Sea Guard stationed in Luofeng City only realized that something was amiss after the announcement. They did not dare to delay and immediately reported it to the headquarters. Luoyang City, another courtyard. After Ouyang Shuo read the urgent report from the Mountain Sea Guards, his face was frighteningly gloomy. Before Ouyang Shuo could react, Feng Tianlai actually took the initiative to call Ouyang Shuo that night. Chapter 1191. What's going on? Ouyang Shuo looked at Feng Tianlai in the video with a gloomy expression. He never had a good impression of a good-for-nothing like Feng Tianlai, nor did he have to be nice to him. Although Feng Tianlai felt indignant, he didn't dare to show it on his face. He only said, "Feng Wu was poisoned by that slut Qing Wan and is still in a coma. I have the final say in the great Jin dynasty." When he said the last sentence, Feng Tianlai finally felt his confidence rise. Ouyang Shuo's eyes narrowed as he had already guessed correctly. He reprimanded, "How shameless. The great Jin dynasty is currently in a precarious situation, and you actually took advantage of it to kidnap Sister Wang. What? Are you trying to coerce the emperor to order your vassals? Don't slander me." Feng Tianlia's scalp went numb from Ouyang Shuo's gaze. Ouyang Shuo shook his head in amusement. He didn't want to waste any more time with these people. He asked directly, "Speak, what do you want?" When Feng Tianlai saw this, he calmed himself down and no longer pretended. He said his true intentions. "I want a promise." "What promise?" "Promise that Great Xia will protect the great Jin dynasty forever. Furthermore, we must not annex the great Jin dynasty and sign an electronic contract." The moment they knew that Feng Qiuhuang was poisoned, the Feng clan, who had been scheming their entire lives, sensed that this was a rare opportunity to continue the Feng clan's royal bloodline. They knew Feng Qiuhuang's temperament well. Once she decided to submit to Great Xia, it was impossible to change. The only breakthrough point was to make Ouyang Shuo promise not to annex the great Jin dynasty. This way, their goal would be achieved. This is called saving the country in a roundabout way. The elder said. Feng Tianlai followed up. "You also don't want the great Zhou dynasty to destroy the great Jin dynasty, right? Once the great Zhou dynasty succeeds, your military operation in the north will have to stop halfway. You might not even be able to keep the newly conquered Central Plains province. If you want us to resist the great Zhou dynasty, then show us your sincerity. We don't want to be attacked by a tiger at the front door and a wolf at the back." Once a person became shameless, they would truly be invincible. In the eyes of the Feng clan, the safety of the Jin dynasty could even become a bargaining chip with the great Xia dynasty. It was obvious that they wanted to take advantage of the great Xia dynasty, and they even said it in a righteous manner. "Are you threatening me?" Ouyang Shuo finally understood the other party's true intentions. When Feng Tianlai saw this, he faintly felt pleased with himself. It can't be considered a threat. It can only be said that we each get what we need. Haven't you always advocated win-win cooperation? This is a win-win situation. Even Feng Tianlai himself felt that his words had a certain standard. "What if I don't agree?" Ouyang Shuo didn't respond. Feng Tianlia's expression froze for a moment before he said, "You're not the only one interested in the Great Gene. I think Di Chan will definitely be interested in my proposal." Ouyang Shua gradually calmed down and said playfully, "You can try. Let's see if Di Chan will leave any bones for you after he devours Great Gene." Feng Tianlai was speechless. Indeed, from the beginning, Feng family didn't intend to cooperate with Di Chen at all. Although Feng family was once a member of Han Dan's 6 hegemons, everyone in Huaxiao region knew about Di Chen's table manners. Moreover, the Great Zhou army was already at the city gates. How could they accept Great Jin's submission and let Great Jin become an independent kingdom? Didn't they see that even big shots like Xiongba and Lord Chunxin could only hide in one place? Feng Tianlai mentioned Di Chun just to increase the bargaining chip. He didn't expect Ouyang Shua to not fall for it at all. However, Feng Tianlai was really unwilling to give up just like that. This was the Feng clan's only chance. Think about it carefully. Time waits for no man. Feng Tianlai didn't wait for Ouyang Shua to reply and directly hung up the video call to show his determination. It's true that any clown can jump out now. Ouyang Shua didn't care about Feng Tianlia's threat at all. He shouted towards the door, "Someone, summon Han Xian to see me." Yes. That night, Great Zhou Dynasty, Handan City. Regent Feng Tianlai even closed the Luo Feng City's transportation array. Looks like this assassination operation is more successful than we expected. Peerless Elegance smiled for the first time. Great Zhou used Green Phoenix as a chess piece to buy some time for the army. Because even if Feng Qiuhuang used the substitute doll to escape, she still had 24 hours to reincarnate. 24 hours was enough for Imperial Wind to do a lot of things. Who would have thought that before Imperial Wind could carry out the next step, the Feng clan would make a ruckus and complete a near-perfect assist? How could Peerless Elegance not be pleasantly surprised? Of course, they had no way of knowing about the conversation between Feng Tianlai and Ouyang Shua. Di Chen was also very satisfied. "Feng Tianlai, this idiot is really our lucky star. Send a secret order to Imperial Wind to spread the news in Great Jin that Feng Tianlai is plotting to usurp the throne and has evil intentions." This is a good idea. Peerless Elegance's eyes lit up. This time, Great Jin will be in chaos even if it doesn't want to. Great Qin Dynasty, Xianyang City. Prime Minister Li Si entered the palace in the middle of the night and reported to Emperor Qin about the recent changes in Great Jin. He then said, "Your Majesty, this is a rare opportunity." "Why do you say that?" Emperor Qin was puzzled. Meng Yi is the Prime Minister of Great Jin, and Meng Tian is in charge of the Great Jin Imperial Guard. The two of them, one civil and one military, can decide the fate of fallen Phoenix City. As long as Your Majesty summons the two of them and offers fallen Phoenix City, Great Jin's territory will belong to Great Qin. Back then, in order to thank Great Jin for their help, Meng Yi and Meng Tian were forced to leave Great Qin and submit to Feng Qiuhuang. Unexpectedly, this was used by Li Si to annex the Great Jin dynasty. Emperor Qin asked, "How should the Great Zhou army deal with this?" As an ancient emperor, Emperor Qin naturally would not consider whether it was benevolent to take advantage of someone's precarious situation. He only thought about the feasibility of carrying out this plan. Li Si said confidently, "This is easy. As long as Meng Tian leads his troops to defend fallen Phoenix City and wait for my Qin army to attack and stop the Great Zhou army from attacking the city. Once Great Xia attacks Great Qin from the north, the Great Zhou army will definitely take the initiative to retreat. At that time, we can sit back and reap the benefits, taking down the entire Great Jin without spending a single soldier." Great Qin had previously promised not to take the initiative to attack Great Jin, but in the blink of an eye, it was thrown to the back of Li Si's mind. For these distinguished people who lived in the Warring States era, in the environment of alliances, breaking and reuniting was a common thing. There was never a contract that could not be broken. There was only mutual deception. Li Si's ambition did not stop there. After occupying Great Jin, my Qin army can take the opportunity to move south and sweep the Central Plains province, expelling the Great Xia army. At that time, Great Qin will occupy 3 provinces, and with our allies, we will be able to fight against Great Xia head-on. We will no longer have to act according to Great Xia's wishes. This last sentence really hit the nail on the head. As an ancient emperor, after appearing in the wilderness, the most intolerable thing for Emperor Qin was to be forced to hole up and watch as Great Xia and Great Zhou fought fiercely without being able to intervene and have to act according to others' wishes. Li Si's words completely ignited the flames in Emperor Qin's heart. Let's do that. Emperor Qin made up his mind. We will contact Meng Yi and Meng Tian now. Your Majesty is wise. Li Si was overjoyed. Only when Great Qin took the initiative to intervene in the Central Plains War would there be a stage for Li Si to display his talents. Otherwise, holding up in Xianyang City all day would cause him to go moldy. Chapter 1192. Qin Shi Huang was filled with confidence, but the outcome was completely out of his expectations. Be it Meng Yi or Meng Tian, they had tactfully rejected Qin Shi Huang's request. Although they were born in Qin and were highly regarded by Qin Shi Huang, they had already pledged their lives to the great Jin dynasty. Qin Shi Huang was stunned. As an empress, Feng Xiaohuang was not a fool. Since she was assured to let Meng Tian lead the imperial guards and protect the capital, she naturally had means to ensure the loyalty of the 2 brothers. The magic treasure that was summoned was materialized. The moment Gaia made the discovery, Feng Xiaohuang gave 2 spots to Meng Yi and Meng Tian. Even Guizi and the rest had to wait for the next wave. Why? Because Feng Xiaohuang saw the danger here. He had already taken precautions. Unlike Ouyang Shua, who kept it a secret, Feng Xiaohuang immediately told Meng Yi and Qin Shi Huang about it. With such kindness, how could the 2 of them not be dead set on serving Qin Shi Huang? The pitiful Qin Shi Huang still did not know how inferior they were compared to lords. It was a pity that Li Si's plan failed before it could be implemented. Without Meng Yi and Meng Tian's cooperation, the Qin army would not dare to intervene in the great Jin dynasty's battlefield. At that time, not to mention expansion, it would be hard to say if they could even protect their base. Luoyang City Villa. Ouyang Shah summoned Han Xian overnight to get the leopard army to prepare for battle. The Feng family's courting death made Ouyang Shuo realize that to solve the great Jin dynasty's problem, it was not as simple as besieging Wei to rescue Zhao. Feng Tianlia's threat was reasonable. If the Feng family were to court death and drag the great Jin dynasty into the abyss of death, it would affect the entire Central Plains. If Great Xia did not adjust their tactics, the future would be ugly. Ouyang Shuo had reason to believe that Great Zhou was not the only country eyeing the Central Plains. Great Qin was a country of tigers and wolves. Great Tang was like a tiger eyeing its prey. None of them were easy to deal with. If the so-called 6 countries alliance really worked together, it would pose a great threat to Great Xia. I hope you don't force me to use my last trump card. The greatest trump card was naturally to be used at the most critical moment. Ouyang Shuo still hoped to rely on this trump card to overturn the Huaxia region's old power structure in one fell swoop. He was really unwilling to waste it on the battlefield of the great Jin dynasty. Although Ouyang Shuo was actively preparing for battle, the development of the situation was still beyond his control. August 3rd, Luo Feng City. Since last night, an undercurrent had been quietly fermenting in Fallen Phoenix City. Moreover, with Fallen Phoenix City as the center, it swiftly spread to the entire territory of the great Jin dynasty in a menacing manner. With the help of the secret agents of the Imperial Wind, the rumors that Feng Tianlai was plotting to usurp the throne became more and more exaggerated. There were all kinds of rumors. Feng Tianlai placing the empress under house arrest and seizing the imperial power became the core of the rumors. Because the matter of Feng Qiuhuang being poisoned was still a secret, Feng Tianlia's sudden appointment as regent yesterday had already aroused the suspicions of everyone in the court. As the rumors spread, the Jin court was shaken, casting a shadow over the ongoing battle of life and death. There were even rumors circulating in the army. Although the two commanders, Guozi and Meng Tian, were acutely aware of the hidden dangers, strictly investigated the people who spread the rumors, strengthened the control of the camp, and strictly prohibited the spread of rumors, it still caused great waves in the end. Even Guozi, who was leading the troops outside, had a heavy heart because he did not know the inside story. In the face of a great enemy, the instability of the central command was a great taboo. As the rumors continued to ferment, the Jin court gradually split into two factions. One faction was the royalist faction, resolutely defending Feng Qiuhuang's position as the empress. There was an endless stream of ministers requesting to see the empress. Since the empress is unwell, it should be possible to visit her, right? The ministers wanted to use the opportunity of visiting to confirm whether the empress was being held hostage. Feng Tianlai naturally did not allow it. He used the excuse that the empress was recuperating and should not come into contact with outsiders to straightforwardly refuse. This increased the suspicions of the royalist faction. The gaze that they looked at Feng Tianlai was already full of probing and rumination. The Great Jin dynasty was single-handedly created by Feng Qiuhuang. It had supreme authority in the Great Jin dynasty. It did not mean that Feng Tianlai, with the title of regent, could really make the civil and military ministers obey him obediently. No one was a fool. The other faction was the royalist faction, which was also the faction that supported Feng Tianlai. The Feng clan had long been a force that could not be ignored in the Great Jin court. There were many people in the Feng clan who were dissatisfied with Feng Qiuhuang's ascension to the throne. These people were very firm in supporting the regent, Feng Tianlai. They even warned the civil and military officials to understand the situation and not to interfere with the internal affairs of the heavenly family without permission, using the excuse that this is a matter of the heavenly family. Foreign officials cannot interfere. Otherwise, it will be disloyalty. A descendant of the Feng clan said as he grabbed the neck of the civil minister. Other than the descendants of the Feng clan, there were some civil ministers in the court who had long been secretly roped in by the Feng clan. At this moment, they also jumped out and waved the flag for Feng Tianlai, trying their best to prove the legitimacy of Feng Tianlai's succession. The two factions could not convince each other, and they quarreled fiercely. The Great Jin dynasty, because of the Feng clan's courting death, and with people secretly adding fuel to the fire, actually showed signs of gradually breaking apart. It made the people panic and low morale. Great Jin Imperial Palace, Discussion Hall. Feng Tianlai, who was still high-spirited last night, was now like a defeated rooster, dejected and frowning. Hitting a wall with Ouyang Shuo had already damaged Feng Tianlai's confidence. The current chaotic situation made his head swell, and a deep sense of powerlessness constantly eroded Feng Tianlai's nerves. The throne seemed to be limitless, but not everyone could control it. Just like the current Feng Tianlai, he did not have enough prestige to subdue the royalists of the imperial court and unite everyone to fight against a common enemy. He also did not have enough ability to quell the unrest and come up with a plan to resolve it. The so-called regent had instead become a curse. As for some of the good-for-nothing descendants in the clan, they clamored to take advantage of the situation to change the dynasty, which made Feng Tianlai curse even more. These descendants who were more hedonistic than him, did they not know who the Great Jin dynasty's military listened to? There was no need to talk about Imperial Guard Commander Ranmin. Ever since the Queen was assassinated, he did not seem to express his stance, but in reality, he quietly sealed off the Imperial Palace and protected the Queen. No one was allowed to approach, making it clear that he only obeyed the Queen's orders. Guoyi, Ming Tan, Zhou Bo, and the other generals were all recruited by Feng Qiuhuang. Normally, they did not seem to be involved in the court's affairs, and now they did not express their stance, but in reality, they were all royalists. Feng Tianlai dared to bet that once he had the intention to change the dynasty, Meng Tian, who was guarding the capital, would be the first to stand up and oppose it. Don't forget, Prime Minister Meng Yi knew about the Queen's current situation. If Meng Yi knew, Meng Tian would naturally know as well. At the crucial moment, with Meng Tian's boldness, if she joined hands with Ran Min, they might be able to kill the queen to save the queen. The reason why they did not do it now was most likely because the situation had not deteriorated to the point where they had to kill the queen. No matter what, for these historical talents, the ruler and subjects' ethics were already deeply rooted. To take the step of killing the queen was a huge psychological barrier. Without an army in hand, how the hell are we planning to usurp the throne? However, Feng Tianlai was unwilling to just give up and use Feng Qiuhuang to save the situation. Firstly, he was unwilling to fail like this. This was their only chance. Once they missed this chance, the Feng family's dream of becoming the royal family would come to an end. Secondly, Feng Tianlai was also worried that Feng Qiuhuang would settle the score after she woke up. Others might not know what kind of temper this younger sister has had, but how could Feng Tianlai not know? If she were to find out that the great Jin dynasty had been turned into such a foul atmosphere in the short span of a day, she would definitely skin him alive. In addition, some of the useless descendants in the family jumped out to clamor, which would only cause Feng Qiuhuang to be extremely disappointed in the family. In the future, not only would it be inevitable for the Feng family to submit to Great Xia, it was hard to say whether the Feng family would be able to prosper. F***CK. Feng Tianlai cursed. He rubbed his hair with both hands, feeling extremely irritated. Whatever, do whatever you want. Faced with this hot potato, Feng Tianlai finally chose to be a coward and did nothing. The Great Zhou dynasty, the initiator of the Great Jin dynasties in action, stepped up the pressure on fallen Phoenix City. On one hand, the imperial wind continued to move. Firstly, it was to spread rumors to shake the Great Jin army's morale. Secondly, it was to carry out secret assassinations in fallen Phoenix City. The targets were all staunch royalists, and then it was to frame Feng Tianlai. This time, Feng Tianlai would not be able to clear his name even if he jumped into the Yellow River. On the other hand, the Great Zhou army was preparing to encircle and annihilate the blazing flame army that had yet to enter the city. While fallen Phoenix City was unstable and the Great Jin dynasty's imperial guards did not dare to act rashly, they would first get rid of the blazing flame army. Once the blazing flame army was defeated, it would not be a problem for the Great Zhou army to capture fallen Phoenix City. The changes in the Great Jin battlefield affected everyone's nerves. Chapter 1193. The 4th of August, Luoyang City. Ouyang Shua could no longer bear to watch the farce in the Great Jin dynasty. He decided to personally intervene in the internal affairs of the Great Jin dynasty. He took the initiative to contact Meng Yi, Meng Tian, Guizi, and Old K, and pulled them into the same meeting group. Now that things have come to this, the four of you, as the backbone of the Jin dynasty and Prince Jin's most trusted officials, cannot just stand by and watch. You must take action. Ouyang Shua went straight to the point. If this drags on, the Jin dynasty will be in danger of being destroyed. Are you worthy of Prince Jin's trust? According to the frontline report, the Zhou dynasty's imperial guard was stationed at the outskirts of Luofeng City. They were responsible for monitoring the Jin imperial guard in the city. The remaining Danyang army, Tyrant army, and Red Blood army were responsible for encircling the Flame army. 1 against 3, the Flame army had no chance of winning. Although Ouyang Shua had ordered Han Xian to lead the Leopard army north, it needed time. Judging by the current situation, the Flame army would be finished before the Leopard army arrived at the battlefield. If that was the case, the Leopard army's reinforcement would be meaningless. What does Emperor Xia think we should do? Please enlighten us. The one who spoke was Meng Yi. To be honest, they were anxious too. Ouyang Shua looked at the four of them. Then I will say it directly. The only way to stabilize the situation is to let Prince Jin reincarnate. I know that you abide by the rules of a ruler, and it is inconvenient for you to do this. But this is a special time. We cannot be restricted by these small details. If Prince Jin blames us in the future, just say that it was my idea. Protecting the safety of a Jin dynasty is the greatest loyalty. Meng Yi looked at Ouyang Shua deeply. As the prime minister of the Jin dynasty, he knew some inside information. He knew that the queen had decided to submit to the Xia dynasty after the war. In other words, Ouyang Shuo was their future ruler. Because of this, Ouyang Shuo's words carried a lot of weight. Without hesitation, Meng Yi nodded and said, "I agree." Meng Tian and the other generals saw this and nodded. Old K then said, "Leave this matter to me." Generals like them were able to make up their minds when it was time to make a decision. The hesitation from before was mostly because no one dared to be the first to break through this barrier, and everyone had their own worries. Ouyang Shuo, standing out at this moment, was truly a decision that couldn't be any more correct. Then it's settled. Ouyang Shuo did not beat around the bush and continued. In addition, the Great Zhou army currently has the advantage. If we want to turn the tables, we must pay attention to strategy. I have a plan that requires everyone's cooperation. Please speak, Emperor Xia. The generals were very polite. They were well aware of the current situation in the state of Jin. Even if the queen appeared, she could only stabilize the court at most, but could not turn the tide. If they wanted to crack it, Great Xia had to participate. Since they had a favor to ask, they were naturally polite. Furthermore, Great Xia was famous for its constant victories. The plan that they came up with was naturally appropriate. How could they not try their best to cooperate? Ouyang Shuo nodded in satisfaction and briefly explained the new battle plan drawn up by the Grand Council. When the four of them heard this, their eyes lit up and their faces were filled with excitement, especially the two generals, Meng Tian and Guozi. They were very sullen on the battlefield and had been longing for a big battle for a long time. It's settled then. After the call ended, both sides began to move. That afternoon, without Feng Tianlia's knowledge, Old K personally helped Feng Qiuhuang secretly reincarnate. Before this, Old K had explained the entire plan to Feng Qiuhuang in detail. Feng Qiuhuang was poisoned. She could not speak or move, but she could still hear. After lying in bed for 2 days, Feng Qiuhuang was already anxious. She was worried that something had happened to Great Jin, and she was even more worried that something had happened at the front line. Because of her anxiety, even the pain of Qing Wan's betrayal was suppressed. Now that Ouyang Shuo had decisively made a move to save her, Feng Qiuhuang felt as if she was a friend in life and death. Between the two of them, even though they were thousands of miles apart, they still had a tacit understanding. In another 24 hours, Feng Qiuhuang would return as the king. At the same time, facing the Great Zhou army's pressure, the Blazing Flame Army saw that they could not return to Luofeng City. Under the command of their commander, Guozi, they simply led their troops to the north. Seeing this, under the command of Heavenly General Wu Qi, the Blazing Flame Army did not hesitate to attack. They had to defeat the Blazing Flame Army and get rid of this threat. The flames of war spread to the north of the Great Jin dynasty. The Blazing Flame Army fought and retreated, fighting bitterly. On the other hand, the Great Zhou army's morale was high. Based on Wu Qi's judgment, the Blazing Flame Army would no longer be a threat to the Great Zhou army in less than a week. At that time, the Great Zhou army could rush to meet up with the Royal Army, take down Luofeng City, and occupy the entire Great Jin. Calculating the time, there was still plenty of time. On the afternoon of the 4th, in Shanghai City, receiving the king's secret order, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th armies of the Imperial Guards immediately entered combat readiness, ready to set off at any time. At the same time, a large number of military rations were secretly sent to the Imperial Guards camp. This time, Ouyang Shuo was going to play it big. In the blink of an eye, it was the 5th of August. Feng Qiuhuang, who had stayed in the reincarnation hall for a day, did not alert anyone. In fact, she did not even enter the palace. Instead, she stealthily went to a courtyard in the city and hid there. This courtyard was one of Feng Qiuhuang's secret strongholds in the city. In the next 2 days, Luofeng City was as usual. It was noisy and chaotic, and the two factions quarreled. Seeing that the Blazing Flame Army was in trouble, they could not think of a solution. In just 3 days, the Blazing Flame Army was almost forced to the northern border. Feng Qiuhuang, who was staying in the courtyard, understood what had happened in the past few days. Her face was terrifyingly gloomy. I've been too lenient with them in the past. To think that they would cause such trouble. It's time to make up my mind and carry out a great purge. As she spoke, Feng Xiaohuang looked at a black-clothed man opposite her. He was the commander of the Great Jin's secret intelligence organization, the Dark Phoenix. He was also one of Feng Xiaohuang's most trusted people. She said coldly, "Hurry up and find evidence of these people's crimes. Once the war ends, immediately carry out a purge. No matter who is involved, investigate to the end." If it was only the Feng family who jumped out, Feng Xiaohuang would not be so angry. She knew a thing or two about the nature of her family members and was already mentally prepared. What really pained Feng Xiaohuang were the civil and military officials who were involved in this storm. Some of them were old officials who had followed Feng Xiaohuang to conquer the world, but they were also corrupted and were busy choosing sides. How could Feng Xiaohuang not be worried? I'm not dead yet. If not for the fact that she had to cooperate with Ouyang Shua's plan, Feng Xiaohuang would have appeared long ago and killed those people. The black-clothed man felt that the surrounding air had turned cold. He did not dare to stay any longer. After receiving the order, he turned and left in a hurry. He knew how terrifying the queen would be when she was really angry. This time, there was no telling how many people would be beheaded. An invisible storm, carrying out Feng Xiaohuang's will, attacked the officials of the Great Jin. Handan City, Great Zhou Dynasty. Every evening, Dichan would meet with Peerless Elegance to have a simple chat about the day's government affairs and intelligence. Because of this, Peerless Elegance was also known as the uncrowned Prime Minister of the Great Zhou Dynasty. Peerless Elegance said, "Imperial Wind reported that there's been some abnormalities in the Shanghai City Imperial Guard camp these few days. Large amounts of resources have been sent to and fro the camp. What do you think of this?" With the popularization of the communication compass, the intelligence agencies could obtain more and more information. Even the slightest movement could not be hidden from the enemy's eyes. "Did you find out what exactly was sent in?" Dichan asked. Peerless Elegance shook his head. "Those were military resources. The Great Xia Imperial Guard camp was a first-class military restricted area. No matter how powerful the secret agents of the Imperial Wind were, they would not have the chance to get close to investigate. Speaking of which, I've been feeling uneasy these 2 days." Dichan got up and paced back and forth in the room. The Great Jin is in such a mess, but the old fox is still sitting on the fishing platform. This is not his style. Didn't the leopard army go north? Peerless Elegance was puzzled. Dichan shook his head. "You and I both know that the leopard army cannot solve the Great Jin's siege. I have a feeling that the old fox must be plotting something in secret." As a think tank, Peerless Elegance was used to relying on intelligence and not making baseless conjectures. The Great Xia can only use those few methods. According to the news that the Great Xia has collected rations in the provinces of the Central Plains, which has angered the heavens and the people. They must be using the Central Plains to make a fuss. I have to say that this move of the old fox is a little too hasty. It is not like his style at all. The Central Plains province has just been conquered, and he is already making such a big move. He is not afraid of not being able to clean up the mess, Dichan commented. Peerless Elegance smiled. He's a little too hasty. He was most likely forced by us. Hearing this, Dichan's mood immediately became better. He felt a little proud of the Great Zhou Dynasty's achievements during this period of time. He then laughed and said, "Who asked the old fox to find a stupid teammate? Now he's been tricked badly." After a pause, Dichan said, "Is it possible that the Great Xia directly teleported the army to fallen Phoenix City?" Although he was proud, Dichan did not lose his rationality. He still wanted to find the source of that trace of uneasiness. The Great Jin Palace has been completely sealed, and there is no news from inside. I don't know what the situation is with Feng Xiaohuang, but seeing that Feng Tianlai is still active in the court, there is most likely no change. After a pause, Feng Xiaohuang said, "It is just that there are only a few days left before the 1-week time limit." Dichan nodded. "It is better to let the front lines pay more attention. We do not need to completely wipe out the Blazing Flame army. It is enough to cripple them and return quickly to occupy fallen Phoenix City. Otherwise, there will always be variables. That is right. Peerless Elegance nodded. There is one more thing, and that is the problem of rations. This year's first harvest is severely lacking. The wheat and rice harvested from various places is only enough for the farmers. Some people have already petitioned the imperial court to exempt this year's agricultural tax. Hearing this, Dechen raised his eyebrows and immediately became angry. These unruly people are dreaming. Without the agricultural tax, what will the army eat? Without the army, how can they have peaceful days? How can they not understand such a simple logic? They're just lacking discipline and are purposely looking for trouble. Pass down the decree. Not only will this year's agricultural tax not be exempted, but it will also be doubled. Hearing this, Peerless Elegance could not bear it. However, when he thought of the millions of soldiers still fighting at the front lines, he forcefully suppressed this feeling and did not say anything. In this chaotic world, there is no such thing as reason. In this war, not only did the Great Zhou dynasty have to provide rations for the 4 armies under its command, it also had to be responsible for the rations of the Song, Ming, and Qing imperial guards who were guarding the borders. This was common sense. After all, they could not possibly bring their own rations for the Great Zhou dynasty. But this way, the Great Zhou dynasty's rations would be overloaded. The various granaries were being consumed at a speed visible to the naked eye. It was no wonder that Dechen was in a hurry to collect the agricultural tax. Chapter 1194. Dechen's uneasiness soon became reality. On the 7th of August, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Corps of the Great Xia Imperial Guard appeared in fallen Phoenix City through the teleportation array in Royal City, without any disguise. As soon as the Great Xia's Imperial Guards appeared, the bustling fallen Phoenix City instantly became deathly silent. The teleportation array has been activated. This was the subconscious reaction of the people. Then someone broke out in a cold sweat. What did the activation of the teleportation array mean? Feng Tianlai had already endured for 5 days. It was obvious that he was waiting for the queen to wake up naturally. It was impossible for the teleportation array to be activated now. Apart from Feng Tianlai, the only one who had the authority to activate the teleportation array was the queen herself. Coupled with the appearance of the Great Xia Imperial Guard, as soon as the teleportation array was activated, anyone with a bit of brains would know that this must have been planned in advance. Thinking of the farce of the past few days, some people's legs were already weak and their faces were pale. Since ancient times, those who failed in coups had never had a good ending. Death was considered a light punishment. If something went wrong, they would be implicated. It was normal for their families to be exterminated. Those who were clever immediately packed up their belongings and prepared to flee the country. They were either preparing to go to Qin or Tang. No matter where they went, it was better than waiting for death in fallen Phoenix City. Unfortunately, the Black Phoenix had already targeted them. How could they escape? In the Great Jin dynasty, the secret agents of the Black Phoenix liked to wear black clothes and robes, so they were called the Black Guard. Being targeted by the Black Guard was no different from being found by the Black and White Impermanents under the command of the King of Hell. A huge storm suddenly descended on fallen Phoenix City. Not to mention the ordinary officials. Even the regent Feng Tianlai felt his scalp go numb. He was both afraid and angry. Needless to say, Feng Tianlai was angry because the guards were disrespecting him. To Feng Tianlai, who thought highly of himself, this feeling of being looked down upon and even ignored was an extraordinary humiliation. Needless to say, Feng Qiuwang's sudden appearance must have been Ran Min's doing. In the past 2 days, Feng Tianlai had been wondering why the palace guard were guarding Feng Qiuwang's palace so tightly that even he couldn't enter. Perhaps Feng Qiuwang had already reincarnated and had been watching them in the dark, silently watching them perform on the stage. Is she playing us like monkeys? Feng Tianlai was dissatisfied. Seeing this, one of the elders understood. She's not playing a monkey. She's luring the snake out of its hole. This is great. I don't have to go through them one by one. Now that everyone has jumped out, I can catch them all in one go. Feng Tianlia's face was ashen, although Feng Tianlai was grumbling. When Feng Xiaohuang appeared and looked at him coldly, Feng Tianlai lost all his temper. He licked his lips and said, "Little sister, you are finally doing well. Without you, the great Jin dynasty would not be able to survive." Following that, he defended himself. "My subordinates are insensible and are making a ruckus. I didn't participate in it. I'm just trying my best to maintain the court situation and wait for you to wake up. I'll help you guard the great Jin dynasty." As he spoke, Feng Tianlai had completely distanced himself from the matter. It would be a lie to say that Feng Tianlai wasn't moved at all when the royal family was at its peak. Fortunately, he had some self-awareness. He knew that the game was different from reality. Players had immortal bodies. The so-called coup d'etat was impossible. If this was the Hope Planet, Feng Tianlai would definitely not be able to hold himself back and sit on the dragon throne. Feng Xiaohuang glanced at Feng Tianlai and slowly said, "Very good." After saying that, he no longer paid any attention to Feng Tianlai and entered the main hall under the escort of the royalist civil and military officials. Hearing that, Feng Tianlai was stunned on the spot. He carefully pondered over Feng Xiaohuang's words. "Very good? What do you mean? Are you satisfied or dissatisfied?" For a moment, he was in a daze. Feng Xiaohuang naturally could not be bothered with Feng Tianlai. After appearing, she swiftly took down a group of sinners and ordered the Internal Affairs Department to arrest them and put them on trial. This was undoubtedly very uplifting and boosted morale. The chaotic fallen Phoenix City immediately returned to normal. Following that, Feng Xiaohuang announced that they would cooperate with the Great Xia to resist the invasion of the Great Zhou dynasty. "We won't give up an inch of land. We will fight to the death." Such a declaration, coupled with the appearance of the Great Xia Imperial Army, was rather impressive. For a moment, fallen Phoenix City was filled with thunderous cheers, celebrating the return of the Queen and regaining confidence in the imperial court. For the past few days, the citizens of the Great Jin dynasty had been suffering day and night. They were afraid that they would wake up as citizens of a perished nation. Of course, this was just a facade. The cruelty of reality was far beyond the citizens' imagination. Imperial Palace, Imperial Study. Feng Xiaohuang summoned Meng Yi and Meng Tian. The commander of the Great Xia Imperial Army, Hua Zubing, was also present. Feng Xiaohuang, who had returned to the Imperial Study, did not have the confidence he had in the meeting hall. He could not hide his exhaustion. Even so, he said sincerely, "General Hua, thank you. I'm only acting on the orders of the king. King Jin, you don't have to be so courteous. The Imperial Army is at your disposal." Hua Zubing was not an arrogant person and knew the relationship between King Jin and the king. He did not dare to be careless. Feng Xiaohuang nodded and did not mention it. He looked at Meng Yi and asked, "How much rations are left in the city?" The moment he said that, the atmosphere in the Imperial Study became somewhat depressing. Meng Yi gritted his teeth and looked at Hua Zubing on his left. He did not dare to hide anything and reported truthfully, "Your Majesty, there is not much rations left in the granary. It will definitely not last more than a week. The price of rice in the market has increased by more than 3 times, and the citizens are in a state of panic. However, the imperial court is unable to open the granary and stabilize the price. I am incompetent. Please punish me, Your Majesty." Meng Yi pleaded guilty. Feng Xiaohuang waved his hand. "This is not your fault. When can this season's agricultural tax be collected? I know that there is a shortage of rations, but it can't be that there is not a single grain, right?" Meng Yi's expression turned even uglier and he was extremely ashamed. "I'm afraid we won't be able to collect the rations." "Why?" "Currently, other than a few counties in the north and west, the rest of the counties are basically in the flames of war. Especially in the east, they have all fallen and become the Great Zhou's territory. The Great Zhou army is like a pack of hungry wolves. They drove the citizens to harvest rations and then looted all the rations to use as army rations. There are already refugees in the counties that have been severely affected. How can we still hand over the rations? Feng Xiaohuang was silent with a pained expression. He said bitterly, "Natural disasters are coming one after another. The citizens have no way to live and are starving. This is my fault. Your Majesty." Seeing this, Meng Yi and Meng Tian bowed and pleaded guilty. Hui Tsubing, who was at the side, saw this and was filled with emotions. Seeing that there was going to be a scene of the emperor and his ministers blaming each other, he stood up and said, "In my opinion, we should discuss how to carry out the plan." Feng Xiaohuang was a woman after all. Seeing the citizens in distress, it was not easy for her to control her emotions. Only when Hui Tsubing reminded her did she regain her composure and asked, "General, do you have a good plan? You don't have to worry too much about the rations." Hui Tsubing immediately released an Easter egg. The Great Xia Imperial Guard Army has brought along a large amount of rations, and they are self-sufficient. The rations of the Baodao Army are also managed by the Governor's Office of the Central Plains Province. There is no need for the Great Jin to worry. This, Meng Yi and Meng Tian looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. When Emperor Xia discussed the battle plan with them, he did not mention about the rations. Obviously, Emperor Xia was taking care of their reputation. Or perhaps in Emperor Xia's eyes, this matter was not worth mentioning and there was no need to specially point it out. The fact was indeed so. Perhaps the entire wilderness was worried about the rations, but this did not include the Great Xia. The large purchase at the beginning of the year allowed the Great Xia to have sufficient rations. The newly cultivated 200 million mu of farmland also made up for the poor harvest to a certain extent. In addition to the Great Xia's perfect water conservancy, the agricultural technology brought by the farmers, and the strong characteristics of the territory, the impact of a natural disaster on the output of the rations was minimized. The scale of the reduction was not as exaggerated as the other territories. It was precisely because of this that the Great Xia could produce a large amount of rations to be processed into the rations as a strategic reserve when the other territories were worried about the rations. This also explained why Ouyang Shua did not mention about the rations. Seeing this, Feng Qiuhuang sighed in her heart. She then realized that compared to the Great Xia, the Great Jin paled in comparison. The difference between the two dynasties was far from just the size of the territory. After discussing about the rations, everyone then discussed the specific battle plan. After all, it was a coordinated battle between the two armies. Even if they had drawn up a big plan, they still needed to communicate personally to perfect the details. Time was tight. The four of them discussed for less than an hour before they hurriedly dispersed. August 7th, noon. Under the fervent gazes of the citizens, the Great Xia Imperial Guards, who had just appeared in Luofeng City not long ago, marched out of the city. Following the Great Xia Imperial Guards was the Great Jin Imperial Guards, led by Meng Tian. The entire Luofeng City was left with the 5,000 guards led by Ran Min. That's great, we're finally saved. The logic of the citizens was simple. Before this, the army was holed up in the city because they were afraid of the enemy. Now that they had taken the initiative to attack, they naturally had a chance of winning. Although the logic was simple, it was very reasonable. The news that the Great Xia Imperial Guards had appeared in fallen Phoenix City quickly spread throughout the wilderness, and everyone knew about it. Therefore, the moment the Imperial Guards left the city, they were seen by the scout station near the city and reported to the headquarters. The commander of the Great Zhou Imperial Guards, Lin Pe, received the report and did not dare to make the decision on his own. He immediately asked Di Chun whether to fight or retreat. If they fought, the Imperial Guards did not have a high chance of winning. If they retreated, it would be complicated. Chapter 1195. Handan City, Great Zhou Dynasty. Although Di Chun didn't flare up after receiving Lin Pe's request, he was still unhappy. Old Lin Pe is getting more and more timid. He's already so scared after being defeated by the Great Xia army a few times. 3 Great Xia Imperial Guards and 4 Great Jin Imperial Guards left the city. Compared to the Great Zhou Imperial Guards, they didn't have an overwhelming advantage in terms of military strength. Even if we can't defeat them, we should be able to delay them. The strategy of the Great Zhou dynasty was very clear. As long as the Great Zhou imperial guards could delay the enemy for 3 to 4 days, the rest of the Great Zhou army could annihilate the Blazing Flame army in return. Tell Yanpa to defend for 4 days, or I'll cut his head off. Di Chen ordered. Yes, sir. In the outskirts of Luofeng City, in the camp of the Imperial Guards. Upon receiving the military order, Lien Po was immediately mobilized to check the defense line and the camp. Like Shanghai City, Luofeng City was located in a small basin. There was only one entrance connected to the outside world. The entrance was 5 miles long and was shaped like a trumpet. It got narrower the further in one went. The Great Zhou Imperial Guard were guarding this entrance in an attempt to lock down Luofeng City. Lien Po was an experienced veteran and was known for his defense. It would be very difficult for the Great Xia and Great Jin coalition to break through Lien Po's defense line in a short period of time. This was also the source of Di Chen's confidence. He didn't believe that the Great Xia Imperial Guards were omnipotent and could break through such a steel defense line. The only advantage for the coalition was that the Phoenix Castle, built by Great Jin, was at the narrowest point of the entrance. Because it was easy to defend and difficult to attack, it hadn't been conquered by the Great Zhou army yet. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to fight this war. At 2 in the afternoon, the coalition troops entered Phoenix Castle and made their final preparations before the war. As a military fortress, it was also the last line of defense for the capital city. There was no doubt that the Phoenix Castle was strong. Even a powerful Great Zhou Imperial army could not defeat the Phoenix Castle in a short period of time. There was a tall tower outside Phoenix Castle. It was the tallest building in the fortress and also the observation tower. One could see the entire trumpet opening at a glance. The 2 generals, Hua Xiubing and Meng Tian, were led to the highest point of the tower by the commander of Phoenix Castle. In history, after the Qin Kingdom unified China, Meng Tian led 300,000 troops to attack the Xiongnu in the north and recovered the Hunan region. He led the army to build the Great Wall of China and the 9 Prefectures Highway, overcoming the predicament of traffic congestion in the country. Hua Xiubing was also famous for fighting against the Xiongnu. Although it was the first time the 2 generals had met, there was not much of a gap between them. Hua Xiubing even took the initiative to address Meng Tian as his commanding general. Firstly, Meng Tian was the host, while Hua Xiubing was the guest. Secondly, Meng Tian was born in Qin, while Hua Xiubing was born in Han, so they were seniors. Meng Tian didn't reject it and accepted it calmly. The biggest taboo in the army was to give out orders to many people, so it was very necessary to have a unified command. Standing at the top of the tower, the north wind blew the scarlet cloaks of the 2 generals, making them look like a pair of peerless geniuses. Meng Tian pointed at the continuous Great Zhou army camp outside the tower and said, Lien Po is indeed a famous general of the Warring States period. The arrangement of the camp is well planned, and there is almost no weakness. There is no opportunity to take advantage of. Following Meng Tian's gaze, the Great Zhou Imperial Army camp was arranged in a fan shape according to the terrain of the entrance. With divisions as the basic combat units, they lined up from the foot of the Phoenix Castle to the outermost area of the entrance. The pure white tents, the fluttering flags of various colors, and the neat and uniform military formation were very spectacular. Hua Xiubing and Meng Tian were both peerless generals, so they could see that the entire camp looked messy, but in fact, it was arranged according to the principles of the 9 palaces and 8 trigrams. Barging into it was like barging into a giant maze. They were now standing on high ground, so they could naturally see the arrangement of the enemy camp clearly. However, once they started fighting, they would be trapped in the vast camp. If they made a mistake, they would not be able to distinguish between things, let alone break the formation. Once they entered the formation, they would be blind. Hua Xiubing said, if there is no weakness, then there is weakness everywhere. The enemy is taking the route of ingenuity, so we can only break it with force. Speaking up to this point, Hua Xiubing glanced at Meng Tian and continued, When attacking, we need one person to command from the Phoenix Castle and another to lead the troops to fight in the formation. The Great Xia army is willing to be the vanguard. Just like what Hua Tsubing said, since it was easy to become blind when fighting in the formation, then it was better to set up a pair of eyes in the Phoenix Castle to look down from above and command the troops through the flags. This was very demanding of the commander. He had to be in charge of the overall situation, and according to the actual situation on the battlefield, he had to be flexible and dispatch the troops to ensure that the troops on the battlefield could break the formation. Meng Tian was undoubtedly a qualified candidate. However, Meng Tian was unwilling. Let us be the vanguard, and you can command from the tower. After all, this is Great Jin's home ground. The Great Jin army is duty-bound to fight the first hard battle. Although the Great Jin dynasty was small, they had backbone. Hua Tsubing still disagreed. General, don't forget that the real purpose of this battle is to cover the Great Xia army to break the enemy's camp. If we don't attack, how are we going to break the siege? Meng Tian smiled. It was obvious that she had already thought of this. Then let the Great Jin army fight the first battle and help you find out the actual situation of the enemy's camp. You can command from the tower and take the opportunity to find out the pattern of the changes in the enemy's camp. This way, the chances of breaking the formation tomorrow will be much higher. Seeing that Meng Tian's words made sense, Hua Tsubing finally agreed. Although they were confident, they were not so confident that they could defeat the enemy with just the first charge. For a formation like the one that Lien Pa had set up, they had to test it repeatedly. Otherwise, if they thought that they could see it clearly, it could very well be a trap left by the enemy. If they were to stake everything on one throw, they could capsize at any time. The matter was settled. Meng Tian turned around and left the tower. He went down to gather the troops and prepared to officially fight the Great Zhou Imperial Guards. Before they set off, Meng Tian instructed the Imperial Guards. My sons, the Great Zhou army has been arrogant for too long, and we have tolerated it for too long. Now is the time for us to defend the glory of Great Jin and clear the name of the Great Jin Imperial Guards. What do you think we should do? Kill, kill, kill. The sullen soldiers of the Great Jin Imperial Guards were already full of fighting spirit and were ready to fight. When Meng Tian saw this, he nodded his head in satisfaction. Just now, he argued with Hua Tsubing to start the first battle not only to try to break the enemy's formation, but also to boost the morale of the troops. The Great Jin Imperial Guards needed a hearty battle to prove themselves. Let's go. Meng Tian took the lead and led the troops out of the gate of the Phoenix Castle towards the enemy's formation. Troops after troops of armored cavalry rushed out of the gate, stirring up a cloud of dust. Behind the cavalry was the running infantrymen. They rushed out of the gate of the Phoenix Castle and stepped into the battlefield. Because it was a probing attack, Meng Tian did not send out the entire army. He only sent out the first army. Even so, the cloud of dust stirred up by the 70,000 troops covered the sky. Like a tornado, they rushed towards the camp of the Great Zhou Imperial Guards, intending to devour the enemy. The Great Zhou Imperial Guards did not show any weakness. The previously calm camp was like a drop of water falling into a pot of boiling oil. Suddenly, troops of soldiers appeared from all over the camp, ready to drown the enemy that broke into the camp. Hua Tsubing, who was at the top of the tower of the Phoenix Castle, saw this, and his eyes narrowed. The formation that Lien Pa set up was indeed impressive. When he thought of this, Hua Tsubing became even more focused. Meng Tian was also impressive, since he wanted to test the enemy's formation. After he led the troops in, he used his intuition as a famous general to charge around the camp. It seemed barbaric, but in reality, he was constantly testing the enemy's strength. Hua Tsubing's eyes warmed up when he saw this. For the first time, Hua Tsubing felt a sense of respect for the Great Jin army. They were a group of partners that deserved his respect. Somewhere on high ground in the camp of the Great Zhou Imperial Guards, Lien Pa looked at the chaos in front of the formation with a calm expression. He was obviously very confident in this formation. Under his command, 5 legions and 25 divisions worked together in an orderly manner, advancing and retreating in a measured manner. As time passed, they gradually cut up the great Jin Imperial Guards that broke into the formation, ready to divide and conquer them. At this moment, something happened. The enemy troops, who had been rampaging just a moment ago, suddenly became lively again, as if there was an invisible thread connecting them together again. Faced with the encirclement of the formation, the enemy became agile. They either dodged or fought back. The troops that were originally scattered actually magically gathered together again. Lien Pa knew that he had encountered an expert. Chapter 1196. So, they were just probing before? Lien Pa narrowed his eyes. He was very sure that there was a formation expert in the enemy's formation. In less than an hour of probing, they had grasped the rules of the formation and came up with a way to break it. It's just that it's a little too simple. Lien Pa smiled faintly. Under his command, the formation changed again. The originally unpredictable formation suddenly became even more dangerous and unpredictable. The various changes were dazzling, not to mention the Imperial Guards of the state of Jin who were in the formation. The great Jin Imperial Guards that had just gathered suffered another heavy blow. It was as if they were being torn apart and separated again. There was no logic to it. Meng Tian was the first to sense the changes in the formation. His expression changed slightly. At this point, he had already lost his perception of the formation and was as good as blind. There were enemy camps all around them. Groups of soldiers could suddenly rush out at any time to surround and kill them. If they continued fighting, they might not even be able to tell which direction was north, south, and west. One mistake, and the first legion of the great Jin Imperial Guards would perish in this formation. The only one who could save them was Hua Tsubing. Hua Tsubing was obviously aware of this. When a formation changed, he was already thinking of a countermeasure. The Tao of formations was the most complicated. It was not something that could be figured out in a short period of time. Hua Tsubing felt the pressure as Lien Pa exerted his strength. Time passed like flowing water. The situation of the great Jin Imperial Guards became more and more difficult. Fortunately, Hua Tsubing was a genius and had studied the Tao of formations. He was especially familiar with the way to advance and retreat. Advancing and retreating together and coming and going like the wind were Hua Tsubing's specialty. When the great Jin Imperial Guard started to suffer heavy casualties, Hua Tsubing finally understood the rules of the formation. He did not dare to delay and began to command the great Jin Imperial Guards to move quickly. However, in such a short period of time, the great Jin Imperial Guards had already suffered heavy losses. They were already deep in the enemy's camp and were not as responsive to the commands from the tower of the Phoenix Castle as before. The entire command system was in danger. Hua Tsubing did not dare to hesitate when he saw this. He immediately ordered the 2nd Legion of the Great Jin Imperial Guards to attack and rescue the 1st Legion. The 2nd Legion, which had long been in position, received the order and charged out without any hesitation. The addition of a new force had a huge impact on the Great Zhou Dynasty's camp, especially since Hua Tsubing had seen through the pattern of the enemy's formation. The 2nd Army advanced at lightning speed and was about to converge with the 1st Army. Lien Pa, who was watching from afar, couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat. He didn't expect the enemy's commander to be so skilled and be able to solve the mystery of the formation so quickly. Lien Pa had probably forgotten that there was a kind of genius in this world called the Heavenly Prodigy. There was no logic to it. However, Lien Pa wasn't someone who would give up easily. There were a total of 108 variations of this formation, so it wasn't something that could be easily seen through. Since the enemy did not give up, Lien Pa would naturally accompany them to the end. Both sides revolved around changing and breaking formations, starting a life and death battle. Lien Pa and Hua Tsubing were like two peerless experts. Although they could not see each other, they used the battlefield as a medium. One of them kept attacking while the other countered. They were locked in battle. If a military disciple who knew about formations were to see this, their eyes would definitely light up. Such an exciting formation battle might not even happen once in a lifetime. As time passed, Hua Tsubing sent out the great Jin Imperial Guard's 3rd and 4th Army. They completely turned the Great Zhou dynasty's camp upside down. The 600,000-strong army was in a mess. Hua Zubing was a firm believer in using force to overcome tricks. No matter what kind of changes you had, in the face of absolute power, all tricks were like paper tigers that couldn't withstand a single blow. The battle between the two armies seemed chaotic, but it was actually filled with hidden killing intent. All of the imperial guards of the state of Jin were holding their breaths, and their morale was high. Meng Tian was commanding from within the formation, and the four armies were united. Outside the formation, there was a genius like Hua Zubing who was commanding. There was a time when Lin Po thought that the formation he had painstakingly set up was going to be broken by the enemy. Fortunately, the Great Zhou Imperial Guard was not made of paper. Even in the entire Huaxia region, they were still top-notch elites. Moreover, they had the geographical advantage. Lin Po wasn't really blind and was still as experienced as ever. Even though he was flustered by the enemy, he still managed to resist and defend this wave of attacks with great difficulty. When the sun set, Hua Zubing finally gave the order to retreat. This was Hua Zubing. He did things without any hesitation. Since Meng Tian said that he wanted to find out the enemy's actual strength and took the initiative to fight the first battle, Hua Zubing did not feel any pressure at all when he commanded. The entire afternoon, the Great Jin Imperial Guard value was almost completely squeezed dry. Even someone as brave as Meng Tian was exhausted after the battle. He finally had a clear understanding of Hua Zubing's style of doing things. This was a person who did not hold back when he spoke and did not know what it meant to be polite. A rough estimate showed that in this battle alone, the Great Jin Imperial Guard had lost more than 20,000 people. These were elite soldiers, and every single Imperial Guard was a valuable asset. Moreover, 20,000 of them had died in one battle. Anyone would feel heartache if they were placed in his shoes. The Great Jin Imperial Guard had never suffered such a heavy loss before. Riding on a blood-stained black warhorse, Meng Tian looked around at the tired but high-spirited men. Meng Tian suddenly smiled. This battle was really satisfying. No matter how big the sacrifice, it's always worth it, Meng Tian thought. This time, in front of the valiant Great Zhou Imperial Guard, the Great Jin Imperial Guard had proven their valiance. They also proved to the world that the Great Jin dynasty was not a pushover and definitely not a weakling who only knew how to follow behind the Great Xia. When it was time to fight, they were willing to go all out. When it came to fighting a tough battle, they were not careless either. After this battle, the world's view of the Great Jin army and the Great Jin dynasty would probably change greatly. The Great Zhou army's camp was still on the high ground. Under the setting sun, old Lin Po's figure looked a little hunched. After all, time was unforgiving. Even so, the surrounding soldiers looked at this old general with reverence and worship in their eyes. In the eyes of the Imperial Guard, Lin Po was the ageless god of war. However, only Lin Po himself knew how thrilling this battle was. The array master in the enemy's formation was really terrifying. The more time passed, the easier it was for him to break through the array. He felt that the array was no longer a secret to the other party. This is only the first day. In front of the soldiers, Lin Po was still full of confidence. He raised his head and puffed out his chest calmly. However, deep in his heart, old Lin Po was already worried and uneasy. Can we still persevere tomorrow? No one could answer. Chapter 1197. August 8th, Luofeng City. The orange sun rose slowly from the top of the mountain opposite the canyon, casting a bright halo at the entrance of the canyon. The tower of Luofeng Castle looked even more dazzling under the sun. With their backs facing the sun, Hua Zubing and Meng Tian stood side by side again. Last night, the two of them had been talking until late into the night, combining their experiences inside and outside the array to complement each other. They had almost solved the array that Lin Po had set up. Today was the day that the Great Xia Imperial Guards would officially charge. If only we could test it for another day. Meng Tian felt a little regretful. After all, they only had one afternoon, and the two of them still had some doubts about the array. These doubts could very well be hidden dangers. They could wait, but the Flame Army couldn't. Perhaps due to the appearance of the Great Xia Imperial Guards in Luofeng City. Wu Qi led the three armies of the Great Zhou dynasty and successfully surrounded the Flame Army yesterday, completely cutting off their path to the north. The surrounded, blazing Flame Army was on the verge of death. They could be wiped out at any moment. Under such circumstances, Luofeng City could only take a risk and quickly break out of the encirclement to win a chance of survival for the Flame Army. Otherwise, the Great Jin Army would really be defeated. Huitzubing was optimistic and said with a smile, "Nothing is guaranteed on the battlefield." "Yes." Meng Tian nodded, turned around, and saluted Huitzubing. "In that case, I'm counting on you." Huitzubing returned the salute and said confidently, "Leave it to me." With that, he turned around and left the tower to make the final preparations before the battle. Near the gate, the three legions of the Great Xia Imperial Guards had already lined up. "Let's go." Huitzubing didn't do much and directly gave the order to go to battle. For the Great Xia Imperial Guards, war was already a common occurrence. There was no need to mobilize them as they had their own way of doing things. As the gate opened, teams of cavalrymen rushed out, facing the sun. They were especially lively, and their scarlet cloaks fluttered in the wind as if they were cheering for the Imperial Guards. This battle could only be won, not lost. Above the tower, Meng Tian looked at the Great Xia Imperial Guards who were like dragons emerging from the sea, deep in thought. At the commanding heights of the Imperial Guards camp, Lien Po also seemed to have a premonition that there would be a fierce battle today, so he came to the high ground early, ready to welcome the challenges of a new day. However, when the gates of the Phoenix Castle opened and the Great Xia Imperial Guards rushed out, Lien Po was surprised. "Are we going to take turns?" It was normal for the enemy to choose such a rotation tactic when they had the advantage in numbers. However, for some reason, Lien Po still felt a little uneasy when he saw that it was the Imperial Guards of Great Xia. Could it be that I'm really old, and I'm subconsciously afraid of the Imperial Guards of Great Xia? Lien Po's expression was a bit ugly. He wasn't deaf or blind. Lien Po knew that His Majesty privately had a negative opinion of him. But what could he do? While Lien Po was in a daze, the Great Xia Imperial Guard had already charged into the formation and started a monstrous massacre. The Great Zhou dynasty's Imperial Guards had already suffered during their first confrontation. Firstly, Huitzubing had studied the enemy's formation thoroughly. Secondly, the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards were stronger than the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards. In the first round of cavalry charge, the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards picked up their lethal weapon, the strengthened version of a lance. Together with the cavalry's high-speed charge, they were simply lethal weapons. No matter how skillful the Imperial Guards were, there was only one way for the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards to break through, and that was to force their way through. The rows of lances gleamed coldly as they formed a killing machine. Wherever the army passed, there was only a pile of flesh and blood, and not a single living thing could be seen on the ground. The Imperial Guard in the front row didn't even have the time to let out their last cry before they were crushed by the rolling torrent. They couldn't even cause a ripple. Huitzubing wasn't just saying that he wanted to use force to break through the enemy's formation. The three legions of the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards were like three sharp blades that formed a trident that stabbed into the enemy's abdomen. Under Meng Tian's command, they advanced triumphantly. Trap? Useless. Human wall? Even more useless. Encirclement? They couldn't do it. The Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards were like a group of ferocious beasts, or rather, like a beast tide that appeared in the wilderness. They charged in with a rumbling sound, not caring about anyone's feelings or fear of death. Compared to the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards, the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards were much more bloodthirsty and brutal. Perhaps this was also a form of war aesthetics. Violent aesthetics. Faced with such brutal Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards, the Great Zhou dynasty's Imperial Guards were clearly unprepared. The battle yesterday had already tortured them badly and caused them to suffer heavy casualties. It wasn't easy for them to rest for a night, and before they could fully recover their vitality, they had to face a more severe challenge. Some of the soldiers had already recognized that the enemy was the famous Imperial Guards of Great Xia. The Imperial Guards of Great Zhou were no strangers to the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards. It could even be said that they were the troops that fought against the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards the most in the wilderness. In every battle, the two troops would have to fight once. In the end, the Imperial Guards were defeated every time, and even their commander, Lien Pe, was traumatized, let alone the Imperial Guards were beaten black and blue by the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards. The fear of the Royal Guards immediately showed on the battlefield where life and death was at stake. Coupled with the tide-like attacks of the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards, the line of the Imperial Guards began to loosen up. The coordination between the divisions was also not as smooth as when they faced the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards. The entire formation began to slow down. Meng Tian, who was in the tower of the Phoenix Castle, saw this and didn't have time to lament. She immediately seized this rare opportunity to lead the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards to launch an even more violent attack on the enemy's position. Every time, they would attack the enemy's key points. The Imperial Guard's position was a whole, and in order to operate, it relied on 9 key points. 9 of the most elite and valiant divisions of the Imperial Army were deployed here. The Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards loved to bite off tough bones. With the cooperation of Meng Tian and Hua Tsubing, the 3 legions seemed to be tireless as they destroyed one stronghold after another. Every stronghold that was destroyed would paralyze the Imperial Guard's position. By the time the 4th stronghold was destroyed, the position could no longer be connected. Lien Pe, who was on the high ground, became more and more powerless. The situation of the battle had begun to get out of his control, and the entire position was in a mess. His command was also seriously disrupted. The only thing he could rely on was the Imperial Guards themselves. In other words, with the formation paralyzed, the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards and the Great Zhou dynasty's Imperial Guards were on the same starting line, and they were competing with their own strength. On this point, no army in the world could challenge the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards. In the process of invading the Great Jin dynasty, the Imperial Guards had already lost a portion of their soldiers. In the battle yesterday, tens of thousands of people had died under the swords of the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards. The total number of soldiers they had was not much of an advantage compared to the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards. In a battle of equal strength, the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards had never lost. How dare a loser speak so boldly? Under Hua Tsubing's command, the 3 fierce generals, Ma Chao, Lu Bu, and Eli, each led a division and started a monstrous massacre in the enemy's formation. They were like giant beasts in human form. The 3 of them were top-notch generals. After Gaia's update, their martial arts skills had skyrocketed. Their weapons and armors were all reforged by the generation's Grandmaster, Oyezi, and were comparable to divine weapons. Apart from Eli, who was still riding the Rakshasa, Ma Chao and Lu Bu had even changed their mounts. After their equipment was upgraded, the 3 of them had terrifying destructive power in the battle formation. Every time there was an obstacle at the front line, the 3 generals would personally lead the troops to charge, and no one could stop them. In battle, they were like nuclear warheads. This battle was earth-shattering. The sun and moon changed color, and blood flowed like a river. The blood and murderous aura that condensed in the sky above the battlefield were mixed together, rising up and down. The color was so bright that it was frightening, as though it was bone-chilling. After this battle, the Great Zhou dynasty's Imperial Guards would probably be trampled into the mud, never to rise again. On the high ground, Lien Pe could no longer maintain his composure. He resisted the temptation to retreat and gave a death order. Pass the order to all divisions, gather together, form a camp, and defend against the enemy's attack. Yes, sir. Among the 3 legions of the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards, other than the 4th Legion, which had a group of infantry, the rest were all elite cavalry. If the Imperial Guards dared to retreat at this time, they would probably be devoured by the enemy. The only way out was to defend to the end. No matter what, the Great Zhou dynasty's Imperial Guards still had the geographical advantage. As long as they did not panic, kept their composure, used the camp as a stronghold, and defended to the end, there was a high chance that they would survive. Old Lien Po once again displayed his rich combat experience. Unfortunately, Lien Po misjudged the enemy's intentions. In his opinion, the enemy naturally wanted to annihilate the Imperial Guards before rescuing the Blazing Flame Army. If it was just the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards that broke out of the encirclement, they would not be able to change the situation in the north. Therefore, as long as the Imperial Guards defended to the end, endured the most difficult day, and took a breather, there was a possibility that they could persist in the battle tomorrow. Even if the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards were involved, Lien Po still had the confidence to defend. At the very least, they could delay for another half a day. In a day and a half, even if the Blazing Flame Army did not die, they would be crippled. In this way, Lien Po could be considered to have barely completed the task given to him by the king. The problem was, from the beginning, the Allied forces did not intend to directly rescue the Blazing Flame Army. Seeing that the enemy had returned to defend the camp, Hua Zubing decisively commanded the army to charge outside the entrance without Meng Tian's command. There was no hesitation throughout the entire process. In just half an hour, the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards swept through the camp of the Great Zhou dynasty's Imperial Guards like a flood. Without a trace of reluctance, they rushed out of the canyon, leaving behind a mess. What? Lien Po was stunned. There's something wrong with the situation. The Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards did not play by the book, which made Lien Po feel even more uneasy. Unfortunately, the enemy did not give him a chance to reconsider, because at this moment, the gates of the Phoenix Castle opened again. The Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards, who were ready to go, took over from the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards and rushed in. Stop the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards. This was Lien Po's subconscious reaction. Until now, he still firmly believed in his previous judgment that the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards wanted to fish in troubled waters, so they followed behind the Great Xia dynasty's Imperial Guards and rushed out of the canyon. If the Great Jin dynasty's Imperial Guards rushed out of the canyon, Lien Po would rather die. Chapter 1198. The tactics of the Allied forces were much deeper than Lien Po thought. Meng Tian led the Great Jin Imperial Army to attack, not to rush out of the canyon, but to delay the Great Zhou Imperial Army so that they could leave the battlefield and enter the wilderness. One intercepted and the other delayed. The ensuing battle in the canyon was unimaginable. After witnessing the might of the Great Xia Imperial Army, the soldiers of the Great Jin Imperial Army were also cheering and unwilling to be outdone. Under the command of Meng Tian, they seized the enemy's weakness in seeking stability and completed a series of beautiful kills. Since the enemy had misunderstood, Meng Tian naturally didn't mind. She took the opportunity to further weaken the enemy's strength. There was a blood feud between the two parties. By the time the sun set in the west, this battle had finally come to an end. The campsite of the Great Zhou Imperial Army had been plowed by the two armies and was in a mess. Corpses were strewn all over, and the campsite was filled with black smoke. It was a desolate sight. Even so, Lien Po still revealed a gratified smile. No matter what, we finally stopped the Great Jin Imperial Army. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to face His Majesty. Meng Tian smiled too. At this point, the mission of the Great Jin Imperial Army was completed, and the results were much better than expected. In just one day, the Allied forces killed nearly 70,000 Great Zhou Imperial Army soldiers. After this battle, the Great Zhou Imperial Army might not be crippled, but at least one of their legs would be crippled. Next, let's see the performance of the Great Xia Imperial Army. Meng Tian rode on the black warhorse and looked back at the entrance of the canyon, full of hope. That night, in Handan City of the Great Zhou dynasty, Di Chun put down the battle report from the front line. He was both happy and worried. He was happy that under Wu Qi's command, the encirclement and suppression of the Flame Army went very smoothly. In just one day, they killed more than 80,000 people. This was the biggest victory that the Great Zhou army had achieved since the start of the war. If nothing went wrong, the victory tomorrow would continue to increase. Without the blazing Flame Army, the mainstay, even if the Great Jin dynasty was lucky enough to survive this calamity, it would be a toothless tiger that could no longer jump around. The Great Zhou dynasty could deal with the Great Jin dynasty at any time. Of course, Dichen still hoped to end the battle in one go. He was worried about the Battle of Phoenix Castle. In just 2 days, the royal guards led by Lien Po were beaten black and blue, and the imperial guards of Great Xia broke out of the encirclement and became an uncertain factor on the battlefield. The royal army was under Di Chen's direct command and was the most important weight for him to maintain his rule. Now that he had lost so many soldiers, how could Di Chen not feel distressed? In view of this, Di Chen even gave Wu Qi a military order, asking him to capture as many Flame Army soldiers as possible in order to make up for the losses of the royal army. Otherwise, this transaction would be a huge loss. Fortunately, Lien Po didn't let the Great Jin Imperial Army escape. Otherwise, Di Chen would really punish Lien Po. Compared to a divine general like Wu Qi, although Lien Po was loyal, reliable, and experienced, he still disappointed Di Chen a little. Their performances on the battlefield were worlds apart. One won a great victory, while the other barely managed to stay undefeated. It's a pity that I can't truly use it. Di Chen let out a long sigh. If Wu Qi wasn't Xiongba's man, Di Chen would have taken this opportunity to promote Wu Qi to the position of Great Zhou dynasty's great general, making him a true giant of the Great Zhou army. After all, Lien Po was still a great general. But when he thought of Xiongba, Di Chen suppressed this idea and didn't dare to take the risk. Ever since he took the position of Marquis Wu, Xiongba had behaved very well and kept a low profile. He had basically disappeared from the public eye. Unless Di Chen summoned him, he would always stay in Jiangnan province and not take a step out of his jurisdiction. It seemed that Xiongba had accepted his fate, but Di Chen didn't think so. No one knew better than Di Chen what kind of person Xiongba was. Such an ambitious and ruthless person would not be willing to remain dormant forever. Once Xiongba seized the opportunity, he would take advantage of it. Therefore, since the founding of the Great Zhou dynasty, Di Chen had intentionally or unintentionally suppressed Xiongba, reducing his influence in the Great Zhou dynasty to the lowest point. In comparison, Di Chen was much more lenient towards Lord Chunxin and Warwolf. In the Great Zhou dynasty's business system, Lord Chunxin's family controlled half of it. Di Chen turned a blind eye to this, in exchange for Lord Chunxin's family's loyalty. As for Warwolf, he was even more low-key than Xiongba. Especially after entering Gaia for 6 years, the once hot-blooded Warwolf seemed to have lost its fighting spirit overnight. Now, even the Red Blood Army didn't care about it. Although Di Chen found it strange, he was happy and let it be. It's difficult. Sometimes, Di Chen really envied Ouyang Sha, who could control the universe alone. Although Bai Hua, Siege Lion, and the others had high positions of power and could be considered as the rulers of a region, Di Chen was very clear that with Ouyang Shua's control in the Great Xia, he could take back what he had given away at any time. Could he, Di Chen? Not to mention taking back the power of Xiongba and the others, even infiltrating the Danyang army, Overlord army, and Red Blood army would be difficult. Di Chen didn't look like the ruler of a country. He was more like the leader of a vassal state. Otherwise, Di Chen wouldn't have chosen to cooperate with the Song and Ming kingdoms to try to drive Lord Chunxin and Warwolf out of their base and consolidate the royal power. As long as he could take down these two, the remaining Xiongba would be at Di Chen's mercy. Di Chen was very confident about this. I hope everything goes well. After all, the Battle of the Great Jin was not only a crucial battle for the Great Zhou dynasty's counterattack, but it was also a crucial battle for Di Chen's absolute dominance of the Great Zhou dynasty. Di Chen couldn't afford to lose this battle. The night dispersed and the day arrived. After the Great Xia Imperial Guards rushed out of the canyon and left the battlefield of the Phoenix Castle, other than resting for an hour, organizing their equipment, and replenishing their water supplies, the Imperial Guards marched day and night. Even his meals were eaten on horseback with water and military ration pills. This time, the Combat Readiness Division was unusually generous. They provided the 3 legions of the Imperial Guards with 2 million military ration pills. If used sparingly, it could support 200,000 soldiers for a week. At the same time, in order not to affect the overall speed of the army, the remaining 10,000 infantrymen of the 4th Legion left the main force and prepared to hide around Luofeng City. They didn't march with the cavalry. Were the Imperial Guards going to save the Blazing Flame army? Of course not. Ouyang Shuo had already said that they were going to play it big this time. The Imperial Guards traveled day and night, not to the north, but to the east. The vanguard of the army headed straight for the heart of the Great Zhou dynasty. They wanted to stir up a great storm in the Great Zhou dynasty at the most unlikely time. At dawn, the army rested for an hour. Hua Tsubing rode on a white war horse and looked at the dawn in the distance. He turned around and got on his horse. Everyone, continue to move. Try to reach the border by tonight. Yes, sir. In less than 10 minutes, the 200,000 cavalrymen were ready to continue. There was a reason why they were so fast. Even if they rested on the spot, the Imperial Guards didn't take off their armors. They just laid on their horses and rested, ready to set off at any time. That was why they were able to assemble so quickly with the military order. The vast army faced the morning sun and galloped across the vast wilderness. It was very eye-catching. Di Chun valued intelligence as much as Ouyang Shuo did. During the attack on the Great Jin dynasty, other than the secret agents of the Imperial Wind Army, the Great Zhou dynasty scouts were almost everywhere in the Great Jin dynasty. How could such a big movement of the Great Xia Imperial Guards be hidden from the eyes of these secret agents? Soon, the unusual marching route of the Great Xia Imperial Guards attracted the attention of the secret agents along the way. At 11 o'clock in the morning, Di Chun received the relevant information. At first, Di Chun wasn't sure of the intentions of the Great Xia Imperial Guards. He thought that their eastward march was normal and their final destination was the north. But at noon, when he saw the Great Xia Imperial Guards marching eastward without stopping, Di Chun realized that something was wrong. Could it be? Di Chun suddenly had a bad feeling. He couldn't sit still anymore and shouted, "Someone, yes!" Passed the order to the secret agents along the way to pay close attention to the movements of the Great Xia Imperial Guards. If they're still advancing eastward, immediately report to me. At the same time, let the border cities and grain transport teams be more vigilant. Don't be negligent. Yes. After giving the order, Di Chun was still worried and paced around the room anxiously. If that's the case, it'll be terrible. Di Chun's face was gloomy. For the first time, he felt a strong sense of dissatisfaction towards Lien Pe. This old thing, how could he let the Great Xia Imperial Guard escape so easily? Now it's all over. He really makes me worry. Taking a deep breath, Di Chun tried hard to calm himself down. Based on his intuition, Di Chun was almost certain that the target of the Great Xia Imperial Guards must be the capital province, or even Handan City. They wanted to carry out a decapitation operation at the most unlikely time. This was very much like Ouyang Shuo's usual style of doing things. This could also explain the series of abnormalities in the Great Xia dynasty. So, all of this, including the Blazing Flame Army's retreat to the north, is it all a trap? For some reason, Di Chun was abnormally clear-headed at this moment. His mind was working very fast, connecting all the abnormalities in the past few days and guessing most of the Great Xia dynasty's intentions. The Blazing Flame Army used themselves as bait to lure the Great Zhou army to the north of the Great Jin dynasty. The Imperial Guards were also crippled. What was left in front of the Great Xia Imperial Guards was a completely undefended capital province. The Great Zhou army killed their way into the Great Jin dynasty from the capital province. Originally, the border was the safest, But with the cooperation of the Great Jin Dynasty and the Great Xia Dynasty, it became the most dangerous border of the Great Zhou Dynasty. This time, Di Chun was completely flustered. Not just the capital province, in the entire Great Zhou Dynasty, other than the Song, Ming, and Qing imperial guards, the Great Zhou Dynasty only had troops to guard the monster nests and a few local garrisons. With just these people, how could they stop the Great Xia imperial guards? No, I can't just sit here and wait for death. I can't lose. There must be a way. Di Chen's eyes were bloodshot. He paced around the room like a drowning madman, trying to find the last straw to clutch at. Chapter 1199. On the evening of the 9th of August, Great Xia's 200,000 imperial cavalry appeared at the border of the Great Zhou Dynasty's capital province, causing an uproar. The Battle of Great Jin was the prelude to the war in the Central Plains. It was the pinnacle of China's struggle for hegemony, and it was the key battle that determined China's hegemony. Not only China's players, but players from all over the world were paying attention to this battle. Great Xia and the Six Nation Alliance fought a battle of wits and courage around the Great Jin Dynasty, giving the players an exciting epic battle. As of the 8th of August, the Six Nation Alliance, led by Great Zhou, still had the upper hand. The capital was still standing, but Great Jin was on the verge of extinction. The Silver Hand was elated, cheering for such a hard-won victory. Even the Azure Emblem heaved a sigh of relief, not wishing for Great Xia to really unify China. But in just one day, the situation of the war took a turn for the worse, leaving everyone dumbfounded. The panicking Di Chun ordered the borders to prepare for war, and ordered Wu Qi to return to provide reinforcements. At the same time, he had other ideas, such as finding reinforcements to protect Handan City. That night, no one slept in Handan City. The next morning, the well-rested Great Xia Imperial Army officially entered the Great Zhou territory. Their first target was the grain transfer station set up by the Great Zhou at the border, Pingshan City. Most of the Great Zhou's grain and supplies transported to the front lines were transshipped through this city. It was the main logistics base of the Great Zhou Army. Since it was a logistics base, it was impossible for there to be no soldiers stationed there. In fact, even at the most stalemate at the front lines, there were 50,000 troops stationed in Pingshan City. Now, there was an entire army guarding Pingshan City. The Great Xia Imperial Army was composed entirely of cavalry. Could they break through this city? At least the defending general of the Great Zhou Army thought that it was impossible. Pingshan City was not a big city, nor did it have a moat, but it had a 5-meter-high wall. The Great Xia Imperial Army had neither infantry nor siege weapons, so how could they break through the city? Even if the Great Xia Imperial Army wanted to imitate the Mongolian cavalry's White Terror psychological warfare, it was too hasty. To put it bluntly, Pingshan City contained more than 80% of the Great Zhou Army's rations. The safety of this city was directly related to the success or failure of the Great Jin War. Even if the imperial guards of Great Xia slaughtered all the commoners in the surrounding villages, Pingshan City would never surrender. Di Chun panicked, not because he was afraid that Pingshan City could not be defended, but because he was worried that the imperial army of Xia would bypass Pingshan City and enter the hinterland of Jingdu province, heading straight for Handan City. If that was the case, the garrison of Flat Mountain City wouldn't dare to come out of the city to intercept them. If they weren't careful, they would fall into the enemy's trap. However, the Great Xia Imperial Army's next move once again subverted Di Chun and the others' judgment. For some reason, early in the morning, the Great Xia Imperial Army surrounded the south, north, and west sides of Flat Mountain City, leaving only the east side open. What's wrong? Are you really going to attack the city? Aren't you being a little too confident? The general guarding Pingshan City stood at the top of the city wall and gazed at the Great Xia Imperial Guards who were in their prime. For the first time, he felt a tinge of unease in his heart. The Imperial Guards of Great Xia weren't fools, and they wouldn't waste their precious time on something they weren't confident in. Could it be that he has some sort of secret weapon? He really guessed it correctly. After the Imperial Guards of Great Xia got into formation outside the city, there was movement at the rear of every legion. Behind the regular cavalry was the Ironback Cavalry Brigade, which was directly under the legion. The Ironback base in Jingzhou had long been on the right track and had reached a certain scale. As the trump card of the entire army, the Imperial Guards were naturally the first army to be equipped with an Ironback Cavalry Brigade. There were two reasons for doing this. First, it was to be a super heavy cavalry that could be deployed in critical battles to fight the toughest enemies. Second, it was to act as a transport team for the entire army. Compared to war horses, the Ironbacks might be a little worse in terms of endurance, but in terms of carrying loads, they were definitely much better than war horses. Given their huge size, they could even carry some large equipment. The secret weapon of the Imperial Guards to attack Flat Mountain City was carried by this brigade. Under the command of the engineers, the soldiers removed the strange-shaped parts from the Ironbacks one after another, and then assembled them into a giant bed crossbow at a speed visible to the naked eye in the hands of 5 craftsmen. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was giant. The 3-bow 8 bulls bed crossbow was the largest among the crossbow machines, but this giant bed crossbow was 3 times the size of the 3-bow 8 bulls bed crossbow. How could people not be dumbfounded? What was more ingenious was that under the research of the MO family, this set of equipment could be disassembled into hundreds of parts, and after disassembling, it could be easily transported by the Ironbacks. Only a fierce beast like the Ironbacks could carry it for a long time. It must be noted that in order to increase the explosive power of the bed crossbow, more than half of the parts were made of steel instead of conventional wood. Because it was too heavy, each legion only carried one. Soon, the assembled giant bed crossbow was pushed to the front line and aimed at the 3 city gates. What kind of monster is that? The Great Zhou army on the city wall had never seen such a huge crossbow machine, and they couldn't help but point at it. Although they couldn't judge the lethality of the crossbow machine, just the crossbow bolts as thick as an arm were enough to make people's scalps tingle. The officers were calm and scolded. What are you afraid of? No matter how powerful that thing is, there's only one. Can it shoot through the city wall? If that's the case, it will be too late. When the soldiers heard this, they felt that it made sense. Indeed, in every siege, there were hundreds or thousands of siege weapons prepared, and they had never heard of a strange bed crossbow being able to take down a city. It was not wrong to think that way. But was it really that simple? Just as the defenders on the city wall were discussing, the giant bed crossbow had already advanced 600 meters from the city gate under the cover of the cavalry, and then stopped. At this distance, it was difficult to pose a threat to the Imperial Guards except for the archers on the city wall. As the trump card of the Great Xia Imperial Army, the light cavalry of the Great Xia Imperial Army were equipped with shields, and when they raised them above their heads, the scattered arrows shot from the city wall were like tickles, and it was difficult for them to be effective. While they were talking, the giant bed crossbow was already in place. Aim. Compared with the 3 bows, 8 bulls bed crossbow, the aiming system of the giant bed crossbow had also been greatly improved. Under the command of an experienced operator, the accuracy could be controlled within 1 meter. This was very impressive, and it could carry out accurate strikes. Fire. Following the command, the crossbow started to rumble and emit a series of roars. It turned out that in order to obtain sufficient kinetic energy, the transmission device was actually equipped with a small steam engine. Then, with a swoosh, a sharp arrow as thick as an arm pierced through the air. It drew an arc in the air and accurately hit the city gate like a missile. Then, like a drill bit, it drilled into the wooden city gate, leaving only half of it exposed. Even though Pingshan City wasn't a big city, the city gate was still made of huge logs that were 35 centimeters thick and covered with a layer of iron sheet. Even if a siege awl was used, it would be difficult to destroy it. This giant bed crossbow was so impressive that the arrow easily drilled through the iron sheet and drilled into the gate. It almost drilled through the entire gate. When the defenders on the city wall saw this, they were all dumbfounded. Just as the defenders were in a daze, the front row of the Imperial Guards moved. The cavalryman in the middle held a long iron chain in his hand, and dragged it on the ground. Under the cover of his companions, he rushed towards the city gate. Under the feet of the cavalryman, the iron chain was coiled into a huge pile that was half the height of a human and at least 500 meters long. The other end of the iron chain was connected to a balancing device that was similar to a harness on a carriage. However, it was longer than a harness and could hold a total of 8 war horses. "Quick, stop them!" When the defender saw this, he instinctively felt threatened even though he didn't know what the enemy's intentions were. Hence, he gave the order to kill the cavalryman. In an instant, there was a downpour of arrows. Under the dense rain of arrows, even the valiant Imperial Guards of Great Xia couldn't withstand it. Very soon, there were casualties, and the cavalrymen were continuously shot down from their horses. It was obvious that they wouldn't be able to survive. The Imperial Guards were also ferocious. They didn't care about anything else and rushed straight towards the city gate. The rain of arrows became denser and denser, and there were almost no gaps. His companions fell one after another, but the cavalryman in the middle who was holding onto the iron chain remained expressionless as he stared at the city gate in front of him and the arrows that drilled into the city gate. They were getting closer and closer to the city gate. When the cavalrymen were only 5 meters away from the city gate, a large number of stones rolled down from the top of the city wall. Under the influence of gravity, the huge stones whistled through the air. Whichever cavalryman was hit by the stones would be finished. Some of the unlucky ones were directly smashed into meat paste, and even the war horses under them suffered a calamity. Other than the stones, there was also boiling hot oil that poured down. Even though the cavalrymen were protected by armor, the war horses couldn't stand it. Once the hot oil touched them, they would immediately be frightened and jump around. Fortunately, the Imperial Guards of Great Xia were all heavily armored cavalrymen. Not only were the cavalrymen fully armored, but even the war horses were also equipped with protective gear. Only a small part of their skin was exposed. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to get close to the city gate. If they got closer, they would be greeted by even more unreasonable, huge rolling logs. A single log could sweep through a large area, making it increasingly difficult for the cavalrymen to advance, and the number of casualties continued to increase. Dismount. When they really reached the foot of the city gate, the war horses became a burden. Following the command of the captain, the surviving dozen cavalrymen pulled on the reins in unison. The war horses neighed and anxiously dug at the yellow soil on the ground, stirring up smoke and dust. After dismounting, everyone quickly gathered together, placed the shields on their shoulders, and joined them together. They lowered their heads and used all their strength to resist the impact of the rolling logs and stones on the shields. Boiling hot oil dripped down from the gaps of the shields, dripping onto their heads and faces. The Imperial Guards were indeed real men. At the critical moment, they displayed an awe-inspiring, heroic spirit. When such hot oil was poured down on their heads, blisters of all sizes immediately appeared on their faces. But they didn't even make a sound. They didn't even frown. They endured the pain and moved toward the city gate in unison. They walked the last 2 meters, which was also the most difficult and dangerous 2 meters. They were only a short distance away from the city gate. Cover. As the captain spoke, he pulled the metal chain and walked toward the crossbow that had drilled into the city gate. Chapter 1200. Clack. After going through hardships and obstacles, the cavalry finally hung the chain on the custom-made iron ring at the end of the crossbow. After completing the task, the captain heaved a sigh of relief and looked around. There were 100 people in the team, but only 4 could still stand. The rest were either killed or seriously injured. Seeing the captain looking over, the wounded man on the ground grinned. "Captain, you go. Don't worry about us." It was difficult to come here, so it was naturally not easy to go back. It was almost impossible for them to rush out with these injured people. When they accepted the task, they were ready to die. The captain, however, was extremely strong-willed. Without saying anything, he rushed out with a wounded man on his back. Seeing this, the remaining 4 men followed suit, each carrying a wounded man, braving the rain of arrows and running back the way they came. Whether they could survive or not, it was up to fate. The division commander in the distance saw this and smiled. Not bad. That's more like my soldiers. Sent a team to meet them and the rest to provide cover fire. Yes. As he spoke, a team of cavalry rushed out. The front row of cavalry drew their bows one by one and poured arrows at the top of the city wall, interfering with the enemy's attack. Seeing this, the guarding general said in a cold voice, "Still want to leave? Stop them." If the enemy was allowed to come and go as they pleased, the face of the great Zhou army would be lost. Yes, both sides poured arrows at each other, fighting happily. Perhaps it was really a blessing from the heavens. Under such a dense rain of arrows, all 10 cavalrymen successfully converged with the support troops, and none of them fell behind. Seeing this, the guarding general's face darkened. What really made the guarding general's face change was yet to come. After the cavalry returned, the great Xia Imperial Army made a new move. 8 of the tallest and most powerful ironbacks, hooked to rods, pulled the iron chains and began to move. The long iron chain straightened at once. At this point, the secret weapon of the great Xia Imperial Army was finally revealed. It was actually going to use the crossbow arrows that drilled into the city gate and the brute force of the ironbacks to pull down the city gate. Under the command of the cavalry, the 8 ironbacks rushed forward, and because their hooves grabbed the ground too hard, even the ground caved in, showing their great strength. Moo! The ironback's head leaned forward slightly, and its front claws scratched the ground hard, struggling to move forward. Under the fierce pull of the iron-armored beast, the city gate made a creaking sound, and the bolt had begun to deform, seeming to be overwhelmed. The expressions of the guards on the city wall changed drastically when they saw this. Only now did they understand the enemy's true intentions. "General, what should we do?" The soldiers of Great Zhou turned pale at the thought of the 200,000 Imperial Guards rushing into the city if the city gates were pulled down. The general guarding the city was also helpless. The chains were impervious to oil and were immune to arrows. Even if rocks were used to smash them, the chains were already taut, and the rocks would bounce off the moment they hit the chains. It was of no use at all. The only way seemed to be to take the initiative to leave the city, but this was also the worst way. Creak, creak. In just a short while, the city gate was completely deformed, and it looked like it was about to collapse. There's no other way. Prepare for battle. The defending generals knew that they were powerless to stop the enemy from breaking into the city. Their only choice was to fight the enemy inside the city. After hearing the general's words, the expressions of the surrounding soldiers changed, and they looked around anxiously. How could they defeat the 200,000 Imperial Guards with just 70,000 of them? Even the most powerful Imperial Guards of the Imperial Court, the Imperial Guards, were defeated by the Imperial Guards of Great Xia. Moreover, they only had 1/3 of the enemy's numbers. If they were to really fight, they would definitely die. At the thought of the fact that the East Gate was not blocked yet, there were already soldiers plotting how to successfully break away from the battle and escape to the East Gate. Boom! The West Gate was the first to collapse, and it crashed to the ground. Charge! The commander of the Second Army, Ma Chao, waved his spear and gave the order to attack. Kill! Upon receiving the military order, groups of cavalrymen rushed towards the city gate like a flood, turning a blind eye to the arrows shooting over their heads. In the face of absolute numbers, the rain of arrows was no longer too much of a threat to the army. The vast army galloped on the bluestone streets, emitting clattering sounds. At the end of the street, the great Zhou army hastily got into formation and looked at the approaching army in fear. Their legs were trembling. The fearsome reputation of the Imperial Guards of Great Xia was truly terrifying. This was a completely asymmetrical battle. Almost at the same time, the North and South gates were also broken. The Third and Fourth Army followed suit and charged into the city. It was as though the 3 armies were competing, and they were bound to set off a monstrous massacre in the city. Hui Xiubing, who was outside the city, did not seem to be excited at all. He had long expected such an outcome. To the Imperial Guards, taking down Pingshan City was just a warm-up. Next, they had to create a huge wave in the entire capital province. In just one morning, Pingshan City was completely taken down by the Imperial Guards of Great Xia. In fact, the three armies had fought in the city for less than an hour before the Great Zhou army completely collapsed. They no longer had the will to fight, and they either surrendered or fled to the East Gate. The city guards were trampled into meat paste by the chaotic army. After killing the guards, the Imperial Guards of Great Xia did not hesitate to set fire to more than 10 large granaries in the city, leaving not a single grain behind. The flames soared into the sky, and thick smoke billowed. It could be seen from afar. The imperial court of Great Zhou was frugal, and the food that they had painstakingly plundered from the commoners was burned to the ground just like that. The commoners in the city were heartbroken to see this. Reality was so cruel. Although the Great Jin dynasty and the Central Plains province lacked food, they could only burn it since they could not bring it away. Without this batch of food, the military operations of Great Zhou and Great Jin could no longer continue, and it basically meant that the war with Great Jin would end prematurely. Under such circumstances, if Great Zhou still wanted to attack Great Jin, they would only be asking for trouble. More importantly, the destructive power of the Imperial Guards of Great Xia had only just begun. After burning the food, the Imperial Guards of Great Xia did not linger. After having a full meal in the city, they retreated like the tide with the prisoners of war. This batch of prisoners of war was the secret weapon that the Imperial Guards of Great Xia used to break into other cities. In the next 2 days, the Imperial Guards of Great Xia persevered and took down another 3 cities. Without exception, these cities were all transit stations for provisions that had been set up along the way, and they were all wiped out. In these 3 days, the Imperial Guards of Great Xia did not even use a single ration pill, and they were all taken care of on the spot. Under the command of Hua Xiubing, the army that Wu Qi sent as reinforcements could only eat dirt behind the Imperial Guards of Great Xia, and they could not even see the shadow of the Imperial Guards. This time, Great Zhou was in a complete panic. The wave of fear that the Imperial Guards of Great Xia caused spread rapidly from the west to the east. If not for the tradition of the Imperial Guards of Great Xia not to disturb the people, it would have caused a wave of refugees. Even so, the people were still panicking. Even the commoners of Handan City began to tremble in fear, afraid that they would wake up as slaves of a conquered country. Based on the advancing speed of the Imperial Guards of Great Xia, it would take them at most 2 days to reach Handan City. At this moment, something strange happened. On the 13th day of the 8th month, the Imperial Guards of Great Xia, who were about to reach Handan City, suddenly made a huge turn and went around the boundaries of Handan City. They marched rapidly all the way to the border of the capital province and the Qing dynasty. It seemed that there was something in Handan City that the Imperial Guards of Great Xia were afraid of. What is going on? The commoners of Handan, who had a new lease on life, were baffled. Living under the feet of the emperor, there was no lack of well-informed people in Handan City. They knew that other than the 3,000 Imperial Guards, there was also the capital garrison regiment. This small number of troops should not have caused the Imperial Guards of Great Xia to be afraid. Someone joked, could it be that the prestige of the emperor has caused the enemy to be afraid of battle? The person who said this did not believe that their emperor could have such a prestige. Even Emperor Xia could not do this. This matter became the biggest mystery in Handan City, and only a few people knew the inside story. Handan City Palace. Di Chan sighed regretfully after knowing that the Imperial Guards of Great Xia had suddenly gone around Handan City. As it turned out, just as the Imperial Guards of Great Xia were showing their might, Di Chan finally invited reinforcements from the Imperial Guards of Qin and Tang. The two countries promised that if the Imperial Guards of Great Xia dared to attack Handan City, the Imperial Guards of both countries would immediately be teleported to Handan City. They would surround the Imperial Guards of Great Xia and dampen their spirits. Among them, Emperor Qin was the most proactive. Thinking about it, the direct rejection from Meng Yi and Meng Tian made the Emperor of Great Xia feel very embarrassed, and decided to get back at the battlefield in Handan City. As for the two emperors who were worried about a direct confrontation with the Xia kingdom, they had already seen through it. The situation in Huaxia had developed to this point. Whether or not the Qin and Tang kingdoms would intervene in the war in the Central Plains, there was no room for reconciliation between them and the Xia kingdom. One day, both sides would meet on the battlefield. Since that was the case, there was no difference whether it was a day earlier or a day later. What Di Chun and the others did not expect was that the secret agents of the Mountain Sea Guards had found out about their conspiracy. This alerted the Imperial Guards of Great Xia, and they did not even go near Handan City. This caused the alliance of the 6 countries to miss a golden opportunity. This favor has been wasted. What a bastard. In order to invite the Qin and Tang kingdoms for reinforcements, Di Chun did not get any benefits. He spent a lot of effort to convince the 2 countries to officially intervene in the Central Plains War. He did not expect this to be the outcome. For the first time, Di Chun had a whole new level of respect for the legendary Mountain Sea Guards. Chapter 1201. Apart from vexation and regret, Di Chun would also face a more difficult situation. This time, the conquest of Great Jin had failed. How would Great Zhou deal with the attack of Great Xia? It's time for the Six-Nation Alliance to show their sincerity. Di Chun looked thoughtfully at the map of the Huaxiao region hanging on the wall. Under the circumstances that the Great Zhou could not fight against the Great Xia alone, the only way to survive was to strengthen the alliance and hug each other. Although it was frustrating, it was the only feasible way at the moment. On the 13th of August, on the day that the Great Xia Imperial Guards bypassed Handan City, Han Xian led the Leopard Troop and officially advanced into the Great Jin Dynasty. They were only one day away from Luofeng City. After receiving the report, Lien Pe no longer dared to stay in the valley of Luofeng Castle and hurriedly retreated east with the Royal Guards. But out of everyone's expectation, the 10,000 Royal Guards that had been abandoned at the suburb of fallen Phoenix City suddenly rushed out and blocked the Imperial Guard's way to the east fearlessly. Then, the Imperial Guard stationed in Luofeng Castle, under the leadership of Meng Tian, attacked the Royal Guards. The vanguard of the Leopard Troop soon arrived at the battlefield and participated in the encirclement. This time, the Royal Guards of the Great Zhou were immediately besieged. Old Lien Po's forehead was sweating. He did not dare to tangle with the enemy for too long. Once the Leopard Troop attacked, the Royal Guards would all die here. Lien Pe had no choice but to abandon the chariot to protect the general. He arranged for a corps to bring up the rear and retreated east with the remaining 200,000 troops. After this battle, the Royal Guards of the Great Zhou were reduced by nearly half. In view of the destruction of the provisions, the heavy losses of the Royal Guards, and the strong intervention of the Great Xia's Leopard Troop, Wu Qi determined that it was impossible to destroy the Great Jin and requested to withdraw. Di Chun had no choice but to agree. The defeat of the Royal Guards made Di Chun realize that the Great Zhou army could no longer take the initiative in the Great Jin battlefield. If this dragged on, even the main force would not be able to smoothly return home. The army was the pillar of a country and the biggest weight in Di Chun's hands. Once the army suffered heavy losses, the foundation of the country would be shaken. Di Chun did not dare to take this risk, especially in such a treacherous war situation. However, before retreating, Wu Qi still organized a strong encirclement and annihilation of the Flame Army. After killing nearly 70,000 Flame Army soldiers, he finally retreated from the battlefield in satisfaction. Wu Qi was worthy of being a divine general. Not only did his eyes focus on the battlefield, he also knew how to think from a strategic point of view. He knew very well that if the Great Zhou dynasty was unable to destroy the Great Jin dynasty, greatly weakening the Great Jin army could also indirectly protect the Great Zhou dynasty and prevent the Great Jin dynasty from launching a war of revenge against the Great Zhou dynasty. This kind of strategic foresight was what Lien Pe lacked. Otherwise, after the Great Xia Imperial Guards broke through the siege, Lien Pe would have led the Royal Guards out of the canyon, retreated to the borders, or met up with Wu Qi's troops. No matter what, they wouldn't have suffered such a huge setback at the last moment. If not for Lien Po's decisiveness, the royal army would have been in big trouble. Firstly, Lien Po had underestimated the courage of the 10,000 imperial guards of Great Xia. They actually dared to block the path of the royal guards with such a small force. Little did they know that the Great Xia imperial guards never lacked the courage to fight to the death. Secondly, Lien Po had underestimated the soldier Immortal Han Xian's ability to seize opportunities. The vanguard of the leopard troop had arrived at the battlefield so quickly, not giving the royal guards a chance to breathe. This was really too surprising to Lien Po. Ultimately, it was because Lien Po had underestimated the enemy. And the price of underestimating the enemy was that Di Qin's most relied on troops suffered heavy losses. With the withdrawal of the Great Zhou dynasty's troops, the War of the Great Jin dynasty finally came to an end after nearly a month. After paying a heavy price, the Great Jin dynasty finally managed to defend its territory. After this battle, the Blazing Flame army was completely crippled, with more than half of them dead. The royal guards also suffered heavy losses, with nearly 100,000 people dead. After this battle, the Great Jin dynasty's elite army of more than 600,000 at its peak was reduced to less than 400,000. In terms of military strength, it was even inferior to Qin, Tang, Song, and other countries, and fell from the ranks of the powerful countries. In addition to the casualties of the army, the territory of the Great Jin dynasty was already riddled with holes after the baptism of the war. The people had no way to make a living, and bandits were everywhere. The direct or indirect economic losses caused were no less than 15 million gold coins. The dynasty's economy was bound to experience a period of pain or even decline. Considering the new situation in the Huaxia region, there was no longer a chance for the rise of the Great Jin in the future of Huaxia. A dynasty had fallen just like that. Although the Great Jin dynasty was crippled, the Great Zhou dynasty did not have it easy either. 1 million troops went out to battle. Not only did they consume countless rations and resources, they also suffered losses of more than 200,000 people. In the end, they did not gain anything and only got themselves into trouble. What was worse was that Di Qin still had to fulfill his promise. When the news that the Great Zhou dynasty was preparing to withdraw from the Great Jin dynasty spread, the Song and Ming dynasties sent envoys to Handan to urge the Great Zhou dynasty to fulfill their pre-war promise, which was to cede Jingshu province to the Song and the East Sea province to the Ming. Di Qin defended himself, saying that the Great Jin dynasty had not been conquered and that the promise had to be delayed. The Song and Ming dynasties did not agree and said with certainty, "We have already done our part in guarding the borders for the Great Zhou dynasty. As for whether the Great Zhou dynasty has conquered the Great Jin dynasty, that is the Great Zhou dynasty's own business and has nothing to do with fulfilling our promise." Di Qin was speechless and wanted to argue further, but the envoys from the two countries immediately gave him an ultimatum. You have 1 week to complete your withdrawal. Otherwise, don't blame us for disregarding our alliance and attacking by force. This was not just a verbal threat. Just as the envoys gave the ultimatum, the Song Imperial Army had already surrounded Danyang City. The Ming Imperial Army that was stationed at Jianya had also sent 50,000 men and horses to Blood Red City. The situation in the Central Plains had become tense. Both the Song dynasty's Zhao Kuangyin and the Ming dynasty's Zhu Yuanzhang knew that in the current situation, the Great Zhou dynasty could no longer be relied on. If they wanted to continue to establish themselves in the wilderness, they would need to have enough territory. In order to conquer a province, the two countries would not hesitate to go to war. When Di Qin received the news, he gritted his teeth in anger but did not dare to act up. Right now, the Great Zhou dynasty was at its weakest. Its soldiers were exhausted, and its borders were guarded by the armies of the Song dynasty and the Ming dynasty. If they turned on each other, the Great Zhou dynasty would not be able to defend itself. Even if the Great Zhou army successfully returned to Handan City, Di Qin did not dare to take the risk of sending the army to Danyang City or Blood Red City to start a war with the Song dynasty and the Ming dynasty. If he really did that, it would only benefit the Great Xia. After all the scheming, Di Chun had to swallow this bitter pill no matter what. In the end, after working so hard, not only did the Great Zhou dynasty not get anything out of it, they even lost 2 provinces. This was a huge loss. Di Chun could only hope that he could use this opportunity to strengthen the relationship between the 6 countries. Of course, it should be called the 5 Countries Alliance now, because the Great Qing dynasty was only a day or 2 away from destruction. On the 15th day of the 8th month, Hui Tsubing led 200,000 imperial army soldiers through the capital province without fear and officially set foot on the land of the Great Qing dynasty. What happened next was both surprising and not surprising. The 200,000 imperial guards and the 210,000 members of the Soaring Eagle Army, led by Li Mu, formed an encirclement around the 200,000 cavalrymen of the 8 banners who were wandering outside the capital city. 2 against 1. The 8 banners army was completely defeated. The battle lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. More than 600,000 soldiers engaged in a life-and-death battle in the vast wilderness. The rumbling of horse hooves and the clashing of swords could be heard within a radius of 10 miles. The war horses neighed, and the heroes were past their prime. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, more than 70,000 of the 200,000 Qing soldiers had died. The rest were exhausted, their morale was low, and they had lost their drive. Seeing this, Hui Tsubing and Li Mu tried to persuade them to surrender. In the face of the general trend of the world, no one could reverse it. Since the Great Xia gave them a way out, the 130,000 Qing soldiers did not resist and chose to surrender. Some of the loyal members of the Qing army were unfortunately beheaded by their companions and taken to claim credit. Early the next morning, Hui Tsubing's troops stayed behind to take care of the prisoners of war, while Li Mu's troops turned around and marched towards the capital. The imperial army had been running for a long time, and it was time for them to rest. On the contrary, Li Mu's troops had been conserving their strength and were eager for a battle. Hui Tsubing knew how to conduct himself. He knew that the imperial army had been in the limelight and had gained enough military merits. If they rushed to attack the capital, it would be rude. Being so overbearing would be disliked. The capital of the Qing dynasty. After learning that the 200,000 soldiers had been destroyed, the Qing court was shaken and everyone was in a panic. A week ago, the main force led by Li Jing had blasted open the capital's walls and entered the city to fight with the Qing army. The army outside the city was the last hope of the capital. Now our hope is gone. Emperor Kangxi collapsed on the dragon throne, feeling indescribably exhausted. Ever since he appeared in the wilderness, Kangxi had not had a comfortable day because of the Great Xia as his neighbor. He was worried all day, thinking about how to protect the foundation of his ancestors. But the rules of the game in the wilderness were extremely unfair to emperors like them. Gaia gave the capital a strong military force, but it did not give them the territory and authority that matched the military force. It was not easy for them to get involved in the battle in the wilderness, but the Huaxia region was already under the shadow of the Great Xia and had no room to play. It's difficult. Kangxi sighed with the same emotion as Di Chun. As the Great Xia army entered the city, the people of the capital looked at the Manchurian nobles differently. They were sinister and made people panic. Those who are not of my race will have a different heart. Kangxi felt upset when he thought of this sentence from Left Turn. Historically, the dissatisfaction and resistance of the Han people against the Manchurians had been settled during the reign of Xuanji, so it was not Kangxi's turn to worry. The wilderness now belonged to the Han people, so one could imagine the situation of the Manchurians. Once the Great Xia conquered the capital, the people of the capital would probably set off firecrackers to celebrate. Just as Kangxi was at his wit's end, it was the 20th of August. On this morning, Li Mu led the 200,000 soldiers of the Soaring Eagle Army and appeared in the western suburbs of the capital. The capital fell into an awkward silence, and the entire court was dead silent. Kangxi got the news and gave up on his last bit of wishful thinking. He did not want to drag the entire Manchurian royal family into the abyss. So he surrendered to the Great Xia on the same day and ended his temporary rule over the capital. the Huaxia region had another country destroyed. Chapter 1202. The fall of the Great Qing marked the end of the war in the Central Plains. In less than 2 months, the Great Xia had managed to protect the Great Jin dynasty while also conquering the Great Han and Great Qing, becoming the biggest winner of this war. After a series of fierce battles, the Mongolian army had completely defeated the Turkic cavalry and successfully occupied the western Turkic Khaganate. After this battle, the Mongolian territory had expanded by half, becoming a super grassland kingdom that spanned from east to west. Just based on the size of the Huaxia region, the Mongolian territory was already comparable to the Great Xia. With the decline of the Great Zhou, the Mongolian Empire had already replaced the Great Zhou dynasty and became the greatest opponent of the Great Xia in unifying the Huaxia region. There was bound to be a battle between the two. On the 21st day of the 8th month, Ouyang Shuo arrived at the capital. Although Feng Qiuhuang had already proposed to Ouyang Shuo to merge the Great Jin dynasty with the Great Xia when the Great Zhou army withdrew from the Great Jin dynasty, Ouyang Shuo wasn't in a hurry to take over the Great Jin dynasty. Firstly, the war had just ended, and the Great Jin dynasty had finally managed to defend their territory. Their morale was at its highest, and it was also the time when the court and commoners were the most cohesive. If Feng Qiuhuang suddenly announced that they were going to merge with the Great Xia dynasty, the commoners might not be able to accept it, and it might even ruin the mood. Secondly, the Great Jin dynasty was riddled with holes, and there were even cracks in the court. Feng Qiuhuang was currently conducting an unprecedented purge. If they merged with the Great Xia now, they would probably have to give up halfway. Ouyang Shuo wanted to borrow Feng Qiuhuang's hand to plunder the Great Jin dynasty before taking it over. It might seem hypocritical to let Feng Qiuhuang carry the purge, but from the Great Xia's point of view, this was the most beneficial method for the Great Xia, and Feng Qiuhuang believed that Feng Qiuhuang would understand. Furthermore, given Feng Qiuhuang's pride, she wouldn't want to hand over the disorderly Great Jin dynasty to Ouyang Shuo. Thus, the matter was decided. After Feng Qiuhuang completed the purge, she would merge the Great Jin dynasty into the Great Xia. At that time, the Great Xia would appear as the savior, quelling the aftermath of the purge and winning over the hearts of the people. This way, she would be able to preserve a relatively intact Great Jin dynasty. After all, Ouyang Shuo didn't want to take over a terrible mess. To Feng Qiuhuang, the Great Jin dynasty was like her dowry. The quality of the dowry would, to a certain extent, determine how far Feng Qiuhuang could go in Great Xia in the future. Compared to Bai Hua and the rest, Feng Qiuhuang was a latecomer. Ouyang Shuo thought very highly of Feng Qiuhuang and had high expectations for her. Naturally, he didn't want Feng Qiuhuang to attract criticism the moment she joined Great Xia. Capital City, West Side Courtyard. After arriving in the capital, Ouyang Shuo did not receive the members of the Qing royal family, nor did he receive the old ministers of the Qing dynasty with great fanfare. Instead, he holed himself up in a quiet courtyard and dealt with the post-war matters in a low-key manner. Staying in the room, Ouyang Shuo could still hear the bustling noises coming from the streets and the incessant sounds of firecrackers. That was the citizens of the capital celebrating without restraint. They were celebrating Great Xia's recovery of the capital. The enmity between the Manchus and the Han was really inexplicable. No matter how low-key Ouyang Shuo was, his appearance still caused ripples in the pond that was the capital. There was no need for Ouyang Shuo to make an appearance. Merely his name was enough to bring about deterrence to this ancient city. The bustling capital city seemed to become quiet all of a sudden. There was a good saying, a person's name is like a tree's shadow. Now, that Ouyang Shuo had reached this realm, just by relying on his name, he could accomplish things that many people couldn't accomplish no matter how hard they tried. Just like this time, although Ouyang Shuo didn't make an appearance and only stayed in the courtyard because of his presence, the officials sent by Great Xia to take over the capital city immediately felt that the previously difficult task had become smoother. The resistance that they encountered previously seemed to have disappeared without a trace. The imperial court of Great Xia had already decided to merge the capital county into the Northern Frontier province, and the Northern Frontier Protectorate would also be relocated to the capital city. In the future, the capital city would be positioned as the central city of the dynasty in the north. With the capital city as the center, it would radiate to the entire north. With such a strategic city, the imperial court was naturally very concerned about it. The degree of importance they attached to it was no less than taking over a province. There was another difference between the capital city and other places, and that was that the majority of the officials in the city were Manchus. This naturally wouldn't do. The imperial court had already decided to remove all officials above the 5th rank in the capital city. Apart from a few who had a good reputation, the rest would either be demoted to commoners or sent to other provinces. This naturally caused a lot of resistance. After all, it was destroying the iron rice bowl of others. If it wasn't for Ouyang Shua personally overseeing the capital city, even with the current prestige of Great Xia, there would probably be chaos. Apart from the officials in the city, the more troublesome problem was how to settle the Qing dynasty royal family, especially Emperor Kangxi. In this regard, the imperial court had two opinions. One thought that they should follow the way the imperial court settled the great Han royal family. They should confer Kangxi the title of Prince Qing and restrict him to the prince's residence to appease the people. However, there were also people who didn't feel at ease. They felt that Kangxi wasn't like the former crown prince of the Han dynasty, Lu Fuling, who had unparalleled prestige among the Manchus. Even if Kangxi was restricted from traveling, he would still play a role in the dark. Rather than that, it would be better to bestow death on Kangxi. There are also people who oppose this idea. Firstly, bestow death on an emperor who had already surrendered would be a disgrace to the dynasty. Secondly, if a precedent was set, it would only cause the future dynasty to resist to the end and never surrender. After arguing for a long time, it was Ouyang Shua who made the final decision. Ouyang Shua pondered for a while and decided that conferring Kangxi the title of Prince Qing would definitely not work. He decided to adopt a compromise and demote all the members of the Qing royal family, including Kangxi, to commoners and send them to the southern border. There was a reason for the difference in treatment between the Qing royal family and the Han royal family. Firstly, the civil and military officials of the former Han dynasty were put in important positions in Great Xia, while the officials of the Qing dynasty had to face a great purge. As a result, there was less resistance to demoting the members of the Qing royal family. Secondly, Tian Wenjing, Zhuo Tong, and the other officials of the Qing dynasty in Great Xia were all Han people and didn't have deep feelings for the Qing dynasty. Naturally, Ouyang Shua didn't need to care about their feelings. Thirdly, Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty had an extremely high prestige among the Han people. His influence wasn't limited to the Central Plains province, but the whole of China. Therefore, Great Xia had to take good care of the descendants of Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty. In comparison, Emperor Kangxi's influence among the people of China was much weaker. Just like in the capital, there are many people who applauded. Therefore, even if Emperor Kangxi was demoted to commoners, other than the Manchus, no one would come out to defend him. Of course, Ouyang Shua didn't go too far. He conferred the title of Emperor Kangxi's fourth son, Yinjin, who was later known as Emperor Yongzheng, as a second-class earl. In this way, he could give an explanation to the surrendered Qing army. In this attack on the Qing dynasty, they captured a total of 320,000 Qing soldiers. Ouyang Shua wasn't in a hurry to come to a conclusion on how to deal with these prisoners of war. He only ordered the Northern Frontier Army to be responsible for keeping them in the outskirts of the capital. The reorganization of the army was a matter of moving the whole body. Ouyang Shua planned to wait until after Great Jin submitted to the Qing dynasty. Then, he would combine the Great Jin army and the captured Han army to carry out a systematic reorganization. Moreover, the war in the Central Plains was far from over. While Ouyang Shua was overseeing the capital, Han Xian had already led the leopard troop back to the Central Plains province. In a short period of time, neither Qin, Tang, nor the Great Zhou dared to have any designs on Great Jin. Naturally, the leopard troop didn't need to be stationed in Great Jin. The Central Plains province had just been conquered and only needed a large army to oversee it. After handing over the defense to the leopard troop, the 5th Corps of City Guard stationed in Luoyang would return to Shanghai City. Similarly, after handing the prisoners of war to the Northern Frontier Army, the Imperial Guards would also return to Shanghai City. Apart from the Flying Bear Army led by Li Jing, who was temporarily guarding the capital, the 3 Corps of the City Guards, the 3 Corps of the Soaring Eagle Army, and the 1st Corps of the Yingzhou Corps would all return to their respective camps. From the looks of it, Great Xia was not prepared to destroy the Great Zhou dynasty in one fell swoop. It was not that they did not want to, but that they could not. After the Great Qing dynasty was destroyed, the remaining 5 countries would definitely be more closely united. There were more than 3 million troops in total. It was not like they could start a war whenever they wanted. If they were not careful, they might get into trouble. Ouyang Shua's strategy was to nibble away at them one by one. Of course, in order to speed up the process, Ouyang Shua did not hesitate to use one trump card after another. The location of the battle this time was in the southeast region. On the 22nd of August, the second day after Ouyang Shua left for the capital, the deputy commander of the southeast military region, Sun Bin, led the Tiger Army and the Xiangjiang Army, a total of 600,000 troops, into the Great Zhou dynasty's Jiangnan province. The flames of war that had just subsided were ignited again. Chapter 1203. August was the hottest time of the year in the south. Even in the early morning, a thin shirt was enough to keep out the cold. For the heavily armored soldiers, this kind of weather was very unbearable. Often, after fighting for half a day, they would feel as if they had been fished out of the water. As a result, the Great Xia army chose to attack the Jiangnan province in the early morning. The sky had just begun to brighten when the brave Tiger Army and the Xiangjiang Army, both of which were in the dew, covered the entire Jiangnan border with 10 field legions as nodes. The brave Tiger Army attacked from the Minnan border, while Zhang Tuo led the Xiangjiang Army to attack from the Jiangchuan border. The entire front stretched for thousands of miles. The 600,000 soldiers formed a torrent of steel that was like a black line from the god of death. It spread from the southwest border of Jiangnan province and rolled forward with the intention of engulfing the entire province. Behind the army was a ration supply line that was even longer than the front line. Early in the morning, the entire territory of Jiangchuan province and Minnan province, as well as every official road leading to the border, were occupied by large groups of grain carts. The traffic was endless, the creaking sounds of the carts converging into a symphony that stretched as far as the eye could see. The imperial court had won 2 battles in a row, and their morale was high. When the commoners saw the rations, they didn't panic because of the impending war. Instead, they excitedly discussed where the imperial court was going to expand their territory. Because they were transporting rations within the borders, the people in charge of escorting the rations were temporary bailiffs. Whichever county they reached, the county would send bailiffs to escort them along the way. There wasn't even a need to mobilize an army. Within the borders of Great Xia, no one had the guts to rob rations. As for the bandits in the wilderness, they had already disappeared without a trace. The rations set off from the county like streams converging into a large river. They were like densely packed blood vessels that converged towards the front line to deliver blood to the soldiers there. Without the communication compass, such a large army and such a long front line couldn't be maintained. The armies were like blind people that could only fight for themselves. The appearance of the communication compass changed the pattern of war. The Great Zhou garrison Jiangnan province was led by God General Su De and 400,000 Great Ming imperial soldiers. Su De's military experience was unquestionable. He took over the defensive line from the Great Zhou conqueror's army and didn't slack off. Even if the war in the north stopped, looking at the situation, the war in the Huaxia area would also come to an end. When the overlord's army returned to Jiangnan province, Even if the Ming army had completed their mission, Su De would not relax. In Su Da's words, "For every day we stand firm, we must fulfill our responsibilities." As the front line of the confrontation between Great Xia and Great Zhou, the fortifications at the border of Jiangnan province could only be described as invulnerable. Over the past 2 years, under Wu Qi's personal arrangements, the entire border was set up with 15 border cities as nodes. Fortresses were built between the border cities, and sentries were built between the fortresses. Like this, layer by layer, they formed a line of defense. In addition, there were beacons on the high mountains, watchtowers on the plains, water stockades on the rivers, and checkpoints on the official roads. Together, they formed an impenetrable defense network. Not to mention the invasion of a large army. Even if the enemy's scouts barged in, they would also lose a layer of skin. When Su De first took over the defensive line, he was also full of praise for Wu Qi's generosity. Precisely because of this, when he learned that the Great Xia army suddenly sent troops to invade Jiangnan province, Su De was not very nervous. Although from the intelligence shared by Great Zhou, Great Xia was serious this time, Su De still did not think that Great Xia could break through the defense line guarded by 400,000 Ming soldiers with just 600,000 soldiers. Unless Great Xia continues to send more troops. This possibility was not very high because the Imperial Guards, City Guards, and Soaring Eagle Legion had all been teleported back to their encampments. If they wanted to reinforce the front line, they should directly teleport to Long-Seeking City. There was no reason to say that Great Xia was so rich that they did not care about the teleportation fee of millions of gold coins. In that case, what is the intention of the enemy? Due to the limited intelligence, Su De was momentarily puzzled. It was impossible to say that the Great Xia army had nothing better to do. They mobilized such a large army and wasted manpower and money just for a border exercise, right? Any general with the slightest bit of political wisdom would not make such a judgment. As a relatively pure commander, since he could not understand the twists and turns behind the scenes, Su De simply did not think about it and focused his energy on the upcoming war. All right, let's use this opportunity to train the army. The 500,000 Great Ming Imperial Guards had never been engaged in a real war. Although Su De was confident that the usual training was very strict and effective, he still had to test it on the battlefield. In the early morning, battles of various sizes began to break out at various places at the border. In order to attack Jiangnan province, the Great Xia army had to first remove all the big and small sentry posts, border checkpoints, and observation towers. Otherwise, there would be no end of trouble. Because the targets were small and scattered, it was not worthwhile to mobilize a large army. They could only mobilize small battalions as units and kill their way into the vast wilderness like casting a net. On the first morning alone, the Great Xia army dispatched hundreds of clean-up troops. The Ming army's response strategy was to defend if they could and retreat if they couldn't. They would neither fight to the end nor give up easily. To put it bluntly, they were using the border resources of Great Zhou to conduct a military exercise. The bustling day quickly came to an end. In the southern suburbs of Overlord City, where the Ming Army's command center was located, there was a military tent. As Overlord City was too sensitive, the Ming Army did not enter the city. Instead, they relied on Overlord City to set up a large camp outside the city and set up a command center for the entire army. General Su De personally oversaw this place. The large tent was brightly lit. After Su De finished reading the battle reports from various places, he was no longer as relaxed as he was at the beginning of the war. After a day of fighting, the results were beyond his expectations. Logically speaking, many of the sentry posts at the border of Great Zhou were located in very secretive places. If the Great Xia army was not familiar with the terrain, it would take the Great Xia army more than half a day just to find the right target to attack. However, this was not the case. In just one day, the Great Xia army had uprooted more than 300 small strongholds and made a good start. Calculating the time, this was almost impossible. It was equivalent to the Great Xia army finding their respective targets effortlessly. The Great Xia army's thorough understanding of Great Zhou's defense line was far beyond Su Da's expectations. Rumor has it that Great Xia has 3 major intelligence agencies, and their spies are everywhere. However, this is a little too exaggerated. With Wu Qi's ability, it is impossible for him to not have any precautions against these military secrets. Su Da was very perplexed. For the first time, he felt that there might be some mischief behind this war that he did not understand. This made him, who is usually calm, feel a little uneasy. Great Xia's brave tiger army is stationed at the border of Jiangnan province. The scouts from both sides will definitely visit from time to time. It is not too surprising that the Great Xia army is familiar with the frontline sentry posts at the border of Jiangnan. Deputy Commander Chang Yuchen was rather open-minded. This time, Zhu Yuanzhang led the troops to guard the southern border of Great Xia. Su Da was the main general, and Chang Yuchen was the deputy general. In addition, there were also Generals Deng Yu, Feng Sheng, and others accompanying them. The lineup was rather luxurious. Tang He, who was as famous as Su Da, led the troops to guard Jianya City. Among the generals, apart from God General Su Da, Chang Yuchen was the most famous. He was one of the 10 most valiant generals in history, along with Shi Wansui, Shui Rengui, and Ranmin. Of the 2 generals, Su and Chang, one was known for their strategy and prudence, while the other was known for his bravery and decisiveness. When the 2 worked together, they were invincible. Purely in terms of commanding an army to fight a war, this duo could be ranked at the top in the history of China. Since Zhu Yuanzhang ascended the throne, he had killed the 9 generations of Prime Minister Hu Weiyong on the charge of conspiring against the government. Left Prime Minister Li Shanchang, Great General Lan Yu, and Duke of Chao Li Wenzhong were executed one after another. Among them, Lan Yu was Chang Yuchen's brother-in-law, and Li Wenzhong was Zhu Yuanzhang's nephew. Among the 34 meritorious officials who were conferred titles in the early Ming dynasty, only a few of them died of illness. Even Zhu Yuanzhang's childhood friend and in-law, Duke of Wei Su Da, was sentenced to death. Chang Yuchen's good death wasn't because of Zhu Yuanzhang's mercy. It was because before the Great Ming dynasty had completely unified the world, he had unfortunately contracted a cold and died in the army at the age of 40. Otherwise, with Chang Yuchen's outstanding military skills and courage, it was hard to say whether he could have survived. Among the 9 emperors who appeared in the wilderness, Zhu Yuanzhang was the most embarrassed. Even Emperor Kangxi, who killed Oh Boy, was more at ease than Zhu Yuanzhang. After all, Oh Boy had courted death himself. Fortunately, Zhu Yuanzhang had learned the thick black study well, which allowed him to maintain the overall situation of the Great Ming dynasty. Su Da nodded his head silently. Although he felt that what Chang Yuchen said was reasonable, he still felt somewhat uneasy. But even if he felt uneasy, the war still had to continue. Pass down the order. From tomorrow onwards, each division must be more resolute in their defense and must not easily give up their sentry posts. If necessary, the border guards can also take the initiative to leave the city to fight and exert pressure on the enemy. Yes, sir. Su Da wanted to transmit some pressure to the Great Xia army. Otherwise, if they continued fighting like this, the entire border defense line would be destroyed by the Great Xia army before the Overlord army could even return to Jiangnan province. At that time, the Ming army could naturally withdraw, leaving the Overlord army in a terrible mess. Su Da couldn't do such a thing. Perhaps the real purpose of the Great Xia army is to destroy the Jiangnan border defense line and create an opportunity for the decisive battle with the Overlord army in the future. A ray of light flashed in Su Da's mind, and he faintly had a guess. Looking at the generals in the tent, Su Da didn't say this guess out loud. There was still a tough battle waiting for them. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.